Hey, it's Romania Black. And we're going to be doing something a little out of the norm today because we're on volume 4 of Scum Villain, Self-Saving System. And I'm trying not to let all the bonus things that I've not looked at out from the bottom. So I'm holding it this way. For whatever reason, the English translation has mixed up the chapter order for this final volume. Now, I'm sure Seven Seas had a reason to do this, and we're going to kind of keep note and keep track. And when all is said and done, we'll come back and be like, okay, why did you order it this way? But for whatever reason. But we're not doing what Seven Seas outlined because I want to respect MXTX in the order that they put the chapters in. So we're going to be skipping around a little bit today. We left off last week at page 59. We're going to skip about, 150 pages. And we're going to be reading chapters 87 and 88, which in our book is pages 259 to 303. On the digital version, it's going to be pages 205 to 240. So yeah, I want to keep in order with what MXTX originally wrote. And then when we get finished with volume 4, we can talk about why Seven Seas chose to reorganize and reorder, whatever the case may have been. So that's the reasoning behind it, or so we think. So yes. Now, as far as the comments, I don't really have a lot of comments to talk about at this point. I'm recording ahead, so as I'm recording this, Patreon has read chapters 78 and 79, but I haven't looked at those comments yet. That'll probably be for next week, and then the following week, YouTube will see them, so help me. I'm going to be interested in seeing what people say, so we'll probably touch base. There'll probably be, from here on in, more comments for the rest of volume 4, but for right now, a lot of it was just saying stuff like about Yu Qingyang being found out and all of that, that I've already talked about in these videos. So I'm not going to reiterate those things. But where I don't have a lot of comments, don't worry, the feral fandom has more than made up. I can't tell you how much I've had to cherry pick to figure out which fan arts I want to show you all. There is so much fan art being shared in the Scum Villain Discord. I'm kind of impressed by it. I'm really impressed by it. I was like, it's December, so Christmas is coming early. We're getting all this fan art, which is amazing. So I just decided to go with either the funniest fan art that I've seen this week, the most feral weird ass shit I've seen this week, which there's gonna be a lot of those, and then some that are thematic and that work for me that I want to talk to you all about. So let's just go ahead and get started. As far as the feral fandom business, we might as well get this over with. We might as well talk about these. This artist that makes, I'm sure they're the ones that made the Skin Zune. I appreciate their consistency. I don't remember their name. Someone in the Discord said their name. I will show you all images here from their fan art. I'm sure you can find it on social media. They are consistent in making just weird ass stuff. So for example, you have QingQiu as this beautiful swan that's not so bad. You're like, okay, it's like a swan. It's kind of like Greek mythology. You got centaurs and stuff like that. QingQiu would like to think they're elegant and graceful as a swan. I get that. That makes a lot of sense. Then you have Lo Binghe as the disciple version of himself as this giant brontosaurus. Now, the way that neck is curved, you could make the argument that it is pointing to the size of a heavenly pillar that we've had described accurately these last few chapters. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's just innocent. He's just a little dinosaur. Nothing crazy. Whatever. But not only do we have fan art that is indicative and symbolic of the size and scale of Lo Binghe, but we also have this one here where he's literally this like monster, this carnivoric, he looks like a horse, but he's eating a deer. Horses are herbivores. So what? This vor is quite terrifying. I don't know what to make of it, but it feels in Lo Binghe's wheelhouse. So, okay, we'll go with it. Now, I do appreciate Lo Binghe as the little skin dragon here. It gives me very Haku from Spirited Away. I appreciate that. I'm all for that. I'm here for, and it fits Lo Binghe quite nicely. And then again, you have QingQiu whenever he was, at the beginning in volume 1, and little disciple chicken wing Lo Binghe. Those are all fine. You know what? These are all fine. They're slightly symbolic in a kind of, very subtle, vulgar way, but I appreciate that. I appreciate the cleverness of that. But there was one that was spoiler tagged, and Pancake was like, look, you don't have to look. There's no spoilers, but I was like, but I want to look. And this artist also, Melted Mush is their name. So there we go, Melted Mush. They did this elaborate room of Lo Binghe's, and QingQiu is sitting on a chair that is Lo Binghe, sitting on his face. I don't question the artist, but there's some madness going on there. And I don't know if it's my way of madness. It's like when my students talk about some internet meme or something, I sit there and I listen to what they say, and I have no clue where they found this meme, but they all know about it as a collective. And I tell them, you are on very different parts of the internet than I am. And I'm sure if they knew what I was talking about here, they'd be like, oh, Romania, you are on very different parts of the internet as well. But anyway, so those were all of the Skinzoon feral creations. Makes sense. Then there were some fan art that I will point out. This hashtag that is like the creepy little Lo Binghe as the baby, and the whole thing of like, give him some milkies, Shazoon. He's not gonna make it if you don't feed him. We've talked about my feelings about Lo Binghe's dependence upon QingQiu for survival and my thoughts about it, so I'm not gonna go into that. But the Shazoon milkies, they're like, do you hate Binghe, little baby boy, little man who needs Shazoon milkies? I'm like, if you're trying to suggest that he needs a parental relationship in his life, fair. His dad is pretty absent. But if that person giving him the milkies is all supposed to be his lover, I don't know if I'm for that. So we're just gonna casually ignore that. But there were also some other fan art that I was like the one where they put, I really like this crossover of Emperor's New Groove, where they have Lo Binghe as Kronk and they have Yzma as QingQiu. Personality-wise, amazing. Do I ship Kronk and Yzma? No. So I'm like, is that saying something about those two and their dynamic? You leave it to there. But the comparison is really hilarious. I do like it, right? I would think Kronk is maybe a little bit more competent than Lo Binghe, if I'm being quite honest. Kronk doesn't like bawl and squall every time he doesn't get his way. He works through it, like a rational adult. And then you have this one here where, again, I like Shen Yun's outfit. I like that he's wearing the green hoodie and everything. But again, he's carrying Lo Binghe around like a giant dog. And here's kind of my issue, is this is pretty indicative of their relationship. You could argue Lo Binghe is an adult dog in that scenario. Shen Yun is an adult in that scenario. He should not be carrying around Lo Binghe, who is a full-grown adult dog. That's going to blow his shoulder out and hurt him in the long run. Put him down, make him walk himself, and then let him go. Take the training wheels off and let him do his thing. But maybe it's not me. Then there were a couple that were of Shang Qinghua. I am a huge Parks and Rec fan, and I think Ben Wyatt is one of my favorite characters in Parks and Rec. And so when he has depression, there's an episode where he makes stop claymation animation, and it's just like indicative of how depressed he is. And this one has Shang Qinghua as basically showing the novel. Instead of the claymation figure he made to cure his depression, it shows the proud immortal demon way, and he's like, do you think a depressed person could make this? And the answer is yes, and that's kind of the point. So that was hilarious to me. But then also, I really liked this one that Be Happy shared, because he really is the literal father of all fathers of Lo Binghe, to be fair. And Airplane Shooting Towards the Sky, we don't get to see them interact a lot with Lo Binghe. They kind of avoid them for good reason. So I would actually kind of want to see this interaction. I feel like Shang Qinghua would be shitting bricks the entire time, but I would want to see it. I would like to see this in full scope. And then finally, I've told you all that I empathize a lot with QingQiu, and I relate a lot to him. And when I'm doing this channel, I'm at home, so I'm exercising my introverted energy. But when I'm at work, I have to always be nice to people, and part of my job is there's a customer service element to it that I'm like, and being very congenial. And I often feel like when I'm at work, I'm like this one at the top of QingQiu in the Leonardo DiCaprio Great Gatsby pose, where he's like, cheers, everything's so great. But then the bottom one is how I am at home. I just want to go home. Fuck. That's how I feel. So these are both QingQiu, but they're both me, and I love them so much. That's one of my favorite. Like, also the artist that does the bottom one with QingQiu looks like Mob Psycho, and that is amazing to me. I absolutely love it. So these fan arts were amazing. I was really happy with them. I really enjoyed them. Y'all keep pouring the fan art. I can't go through all of them. There were so many I couldn't show you all this week because otherwise we'd be here for an hour just looking at Discord fan art, and I don't want to hold you all up because we got chapters 87 and 88 to look into, and so we're going to go from there. So, but with that being said, I'm super excited to dive into these 2 chapters and to see what we're going to get. So, in our book, we're on page 259. On the digital version, we're on page 205, and we're looking at part 27, or chapter 87, and we're going to be looking at 87 and 88. I don't remember, because I'll be honest, when I wrote all of these down, I just wrote them down and divvied them up how I wanted to. I didn't really I did pay attention at the time to parts that were just their own section to do at once, or if it was kind of like last week where we were finishing up the first part and doing a single chapter together. I don't remember if this is a single chapter or a 2-parter or 2 out of 3. I don't remember. So I'm going to be as surprised as you are. So, or you guys won't be surprised. You all know what's coming. But anyway, we're going to dive right into Scum Villain Self-Saving System, chapter 87. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Chapter 27, The Deep Dream. Chapter 87, so part 27. Okay. Is this going to be like Incense Burner? I hope not. I don't think that I can approve of Incense Burner Modazushi. I don't know about here. But they have established the Dream Realm as a thing in this story. So this is probably like a Dream Realm chapter, which has lots of opportunities. So we'll just have to see. All right. So after lying down to sleep, QingQiu opened his eyes to find himself in a different place. This wasn't his first time experiencing such a situation, so he wasn't flustered. He knew he must have again entered Lo Binghe's dream realm. After drifting about for a while, he lightly landed on the ground. With every brush of his foot, he propelled himself forward, as if traveling on the wind and stepping upon willows. Resplendent jade and gold glittered all around him, and decor magnificent and extravagant, plus one of the corridors looked incredibly familiar. This was 100% Huan Palace. Are we going back to the water prison? Perhaps? He walked down that corridor and at the end found Huan Palace's main palace and assembly hall. Maybe we'll see Shaoling. In the past, Lo Binghe himself would have been waiting for him within the dream realm for a while now. But this time, QingQiu didn't see him. Well, that was strange. There was somebody in the assembly hall. When QingQiu looked at that back, he found it familiar too. When he looked again from up close, he found it quite strange. Mu Shidi? He said, stunned. The Mu Chief Qingfang solemnly standing in the hall was an illusion born from Lo Binghe's memories. So naturally, he didn't hear QingQiu. This junior of his had always possessed a mild temper. But as Mu Qingfang stood in the center of the assembly hall, his expression was devoid of any goodwill. QingQiu recalled what the Jianggu rumors had said, that not long after he'd played dead and escaped, Lo Binghe had kidnapped Mu Qingfang to Wanhua Palace and demanded that he heal QingQiu. This scene must have occurred during that period. Okay, so backing up real quick. So whenever Lo Binghe, after the whole thing of QingQiu self-detonating, this guy tried to escape. Lo Binghe captured him and tried to make him heal QingQiu as the corpse without knowing that QingQiu was in the mushroom body. Okay. I swear, if QingQiu gets this point, he's like, if only I hadn't done the mushroom body, I'm gonna vomit. A black shadow passed soundlessly by him, and Lo Binghe's voice said, Mu Zhongsheng. This Lo Binghe's eyes held no trace of QingQiu's reflection, and he was entirely unaware of QingQiu's presence. So this also wasn't Lo Binghe's real self, but rather a memory. QingQiu was a little puzzled. Had he drifted into a part of the dream realm that even the real Lo Binghe couldn't control? Is this Mei Mo's doings, maybe? Neither the way in which Lo Binghe addressed him nor his attitude could be considered disrespectful, so Mu Qingfang replied, "Your distinguished self addressed me as Mu Xiangzhang. Does this mean you recognize yourself as belonging to Sangzhong Mountain, or do you not?" "Does it matter how I recognize myself?" Lo Binghe asked. "If you don't recognize yourself as such, then why do you still address Shen Shizhong as Shizun? And if you do recognize yourself as such, you should call me Shishu. Moreover, why did you harm Sangzhong Mountain's disciples to forcibly bring me here?" "I have asked Mu Xiangsheng to come so that he may take a look at my Shizun." Mu Qingfang smiled. Shen Shizhong self-detonated before everyone's eyes in Huahu's city and perished, devoid of any spiritual energy. I'm afraid that at this point, even his corpse will have long since festered and decayed. This Mu had already knows there is no way to bring people back to life. As Shen Qingqiu listened to this exchange of questions and answers, he broke out in a cold sweat. Mu Qingfang's personality wasn't like that of Qi Qingqi or Liu Qingge, who couldn't tolerate the slightest offense and would explode at the smallest thing. But his replies in this moment weren't very pleasant. Though Shen Qingqiu knew that everything would turn out all right, he couldn't help tensing in fear for Mu Qingfang, afraid that he would infuriate Lo Binghe and bring some unnecessary suffering upon himself. Luckily, Lo Binghe was unmoved. "I only ask that Mu Xiangjing should take a look," he said coldly. As he was now under Lo Binghe's control, Mu Qingfang could only allow a group of yellow-robed disciples to escort him to Wanhua Palace. Well, okay, Lo Binghe's showing some restraint. He's not blowing up. Maybe we only reserve that for Shen Qingqiu. But he's handling this a lot better than I thought he would, but maybe he's just trying to get him to help. The frigid air within Wanhua Pavilion cut to the bone. As the two of them crossed over the threshold, one in the front and the other in the back, the great doors immediately shut behind them. Shen Qingqiu stole in right on their heels. Lo Binghe lifted the gauzy curtain over the sitting platform, tying it back. Mu Qingfang bent over for his examination. Shen Qingqiu also wanted to head over for a look, but unfortunately, Mu Qingfang practically sprang upright straight away, dropping the curtain and blocking Shen Qingqiu's line of sight, as his face twisted a little. "What method did you use to preserve the body?" Mu Qingfang asked. "Mu Xiangxing is the Chan Shao Peak Lord," Lo Binghe said very lightly. "You know better how I preserve a fleshy body without destroying it." Oh, so is that suggesting that Mu should know how he's poured that spiritual energy into it or done something sexual with it? After a long pause, Mu Qingfang's original attitude of indirect refusal to cooperate finally collapsed. "Forcefully channeling your spiritual energy into Shen Shizhong's corpse every day does barely anything. You just barely prevent his body's decay while consuming an enormous amount of spiritual power. Furthermore, the moment you stop for a single day, all your prior efforts will go to waste. With all due respect, Shen Shizhong has already Shao's peaks. Medical skills are the best in the world," Lo Binghe interrupted. "Moreover, Mu Xiangsheng is a peak lord. You must know of some alternative." "There is none," said Mu Qingfang. Faced with this stubbornness, Lo Binghe's already thin patience finally wore out completely. "Well, if there isn't a way, then think of one," he sneered. "Until Mu Xizhong thinks of an alternative, he has no need to return to Sangzhong Mountain." Very Beast from Beauty and the Beast, right? With a fierce wave of his sleeve, the great doors of Huanhua Pavilion suddenly burst open, startling Mu Qingfang. Before he'd recovered, he'd been thrown out of the pavilion, and a group of yellow-robed disciples promptly surged forward to grab him, having been waiting all that while, and right after the doors slammed shut. A gust of cold wind blew through the pavilion. The candle fire within swayed, flickering between light and dark. Suddenly, Lo Binghe called in his direction, "Shizun." Shen Qingqiu's initial reaction was to startle. He thought that the Lo Binghe in his memory had seen him. However, he soon realized that Lo Binghe was only calling to him for the sake of it. He held no expectations that someone would answer. Only after standing in the entranceway for a while did Lo Binghe slowly walk towards Shen Qingqiu. He sat on the side of the platform and tied up the curtain anew and then stared at the body's face in a daze. This daze lasted for a long period of time. Shen Qingqiu stood there with nothing to do, to the point that it became unbearable. He shifted his weight back and forth, and then, unable to take it any longer, he also went to the platform. As Lo Binghe stared at his corpse's face, Shen Qingqiu stared at Lo Binghe's. They stared and stared until Lo Binghe reached out and slowly unfastened the sash of the corpse's robe. The leg with which QingQiu was crouching suddenly buckled a little. Words like "the scene was too beautiful to behold" really didn't suit this moment, because the corpse sitting upon the sitting platform really didn't look that great. From the neck down, it was wholly mottled and discolored, livor mortis. Binghe removed his own outer robe. Oh, I don't know where we're heading with this. Uh-oh. Then, like he was handling a large doll, he pulled the corpse into an embrace, so they pressed skin to skin. If a stranger saw this, they would be definitely frightened out of their wits, or they would find the whole thing overwhelmingly disgusting, and a selection of nasty words would come to mind. But in reality, Binghe only held the corpse. He didn't touch it in any proper sort of way. Oh, thank God. Binghe's jaw pressed against the dark crown of QingQiu's hair. One of his hands slid down the curve of his spine, gently caressing it. While he did so, he sent large amounts of spiritual energy into the body. The green-purple spots of livor mortis slowly faded, and the skin once again became a smooth snow white. This position and these movements both pulled gently at a string within QingQiu's heart. He remembered he'd once performed these exact movements for Binghe. It had been a night not long after Binghe moved into the bamboo house. Oh, interesting. Okay. It was a winter night. A frigid wind wailed through the forests of Xijing Peak, the thousands of bamboo stalks rustling with the gusts. QingQiu reclined upon his bed, not asleep but resting with his eyes closed. As he rested, from the small world on the other side of the screen, there came a quiet, restrained creaking. It was as if this person there was tossing and turning, unable to fall asleep. Then the sounds of restless shifting abruptly ceased, and someone lightly got off the bed, lifted the curtain, and exited the bamboo house. What was Binghe doing, slipping outside in the middle of the night instead of sleeping? QingQiu didn't recall this period of the plot having an adventure that required sneaking outside during the wee hours of the morning. Curious, he also rose. His cultivation was on a different level than Binghe's, and his movements were both light and swift. Therefore, even once he'd circled around to come up behind Binghe's back, his disciple completely failed to notice. Binghe hadn't gone very far either. He hadn't headed to some secret and mysterious location for an adventure. Rather, he simply stood in the backyard before he pulled up a small stool to sit on. The clothes on his upper body had already been removed, and they now lay neatly folded upon his left thigh, while his right hand poured a small amount of something into his left palm, which he applied to his body. He rubbed himself a couple times thereafter. Soft, gasping breaths escaped his mouth. Beneath the moonlight, his youthful 15 or 16-year-old body wasn't frail, but it wasn't strong. It was covered with belt after belt of purple bruises, and a faint fragrance of medicine and alcohol drifted over on the night wind. Binghe, said QingQiu. The person in question jumped in shock, springing up from the stool. The neatly folded shirt fell to the ground. "Oh, Shizun," said Binghe, astounded. "Why are you awake?" QingQiu walked over to him. This master wasn't sleeping. "Did this disciple wake Shizun?" asked Binghe. "I'm sorry. I came out because I didn't want to disturb Shizun's rest, but to think that I still..." So this child had been afraid that after his tossing and turning would wake him. That's why he'd come out in the dead of the night to apply a medicine tincture to himself. The pain must have been truly overpowering. "Where did these injuries come from?" said QingQiu. "Oh, they're not a problem," said Binghe. "It's just that recently this disciple failed to properly conduct his cultivation training, so he needlessly ended up with more injuries than usual." QingQiu looked closely at the injuries. "Did Bison Peak pick on you again, did they?" Binghe didn't want to say yes, but he was also unwilling to lie. The more QingQiu regarded his silent appearance, the angrier he became. "What did this master teach you before? If you can't beat them, run. And did you do that?" But if this disciple did that, he would lose a great deal of face for Xijing Peak. Hitting people just because they feel like it. What's the difference between Bison Peak and the common thugs and bullies down the mountain? In all seriousness, exactly which of us has lost face? Is it Xijing Peak or Bison? This master is off to look for Liu Qingge this instant. There are 365 days in a year. If he took just one of them to discipline his juniors, they wouldn't be so barbaric. Lo Binghe grabbed him. Oh, Shizun, you mustn't. If Shizun ends up quarreling with Liu Shishu again because of this disciple, then he... Unable to restrain Shen QingQiu, his legs went limp. When Shen QingQiu stopped, he quickly added, besides, these aren't all from my Bison Peak, Shidi. I injured myself more getting knocked around during cultivation training. That's why it looks so awful. At the sight of his agitation, Shen QingQiu let out a sigh. When cultivating, one must proceed gradually and step by step, following the natural path. How can one force growth? As you are, it's as if you're uprooting sprouts to make them taller. If you end up damaging your base, won't you live a life full of regret? And one day, Shen QingQiu would definitely think of some way to teach those Bison Peak brutes a lesson. He'd even use Liu Qingge to discipline them so that they'd be unable to voice their objections. The 7th-ranked Peak dared to challenge the 2nd-ranked. Had they no concept of seniority at all? How could he let this go? Yes, Lo Binghe murmured. You should head inside, said Shen QingQiu. Lo Binghe waved his hands back and forth. No, I'll stay outside. If I go in, I'll disturb Shizun's rest. Shen QingQiu curled his finger, and the shirt on the ground flew into his hand. He shook it out and draped it over Lo Binghe's shoulders. What rest? Now that this master has seen you, how can he allow you to stay alone outside while braving the cold wind? Once the two of them were back inside the bamboo house, Lo Binghe wanted to return to his bed, but Shen QingQiu took the medicine he was holding and gestured for him to get on the couch in his personal chamber. Lo Binghe was pulled over to it, still stunned, and he remained so until Shen QingQiu started to unfasten the sash that he just retied. Then his entire face flushed red as he pulled his collar tightly shut and backed up several steps. Shizun, what are you doing? Shen QingQiu shook the little bottle of medicine. Applying medicine for you. I'll massage your bruises after. Oh, no need. I'll do it myself. Lo Binghe flung himself forward, trying to grab the bottle, but Shen QingQiu flipped his right hand over and grabbed his wrist. He pulled Lo Binghe's arm toward him and said expressionlessly, can you see the location of the bruises on your back? Lo Binghe shivered. I'll just apply it everywhere. He still refused to give up on retaking the bottle. Normally, Lo Binghe was unfailingly submissive, gentle, calm. This was the first time Shen QingQiu had seen him with his ears so red they seemed about to drip blood. He found it amusing, and he thought it was probably because the child had grown up a little. Thus, he now felt that being beaten was shameful, and having his master apply medicine for him because of that was even more shameful. Oh my God, Shen QingQiu! No, well, that might be part of it, but I don't think that's all of it. Though Shen QingQiu was secretly laughing in his heart. Oh my God, like Lo Binghe is in torment, and Shen QingQiu's laughing about it. No! His face remained solemn. Nonsense, he scolded. Shanzhou Peak always sends a set amount of medication every time. How can we let you waste it so? Lo Binghe couldn't even manage to say this disciple anymore. Tears welled in his eyes, and he held his shirt tightly closed over his chest, looking like he had completely lost his wits. Shen QingQiu grasped him by the shoulder and swivel around. Then he swept off his shirt in one go before applying the liquid inside the little bottle to the wounds on his back. Taken by surprise, Lo Binghe made a small sound. Ah! Shen QingQiu swiftly lessened the force of his touch. Was I pressing too hard? Lo Binghe shook his head violently. Well, then what are you crying out for? You're a big, strong man. You can't stand a little bit of pain. Lo Binghe's voice was like a mosquito. No, it's not pain. Putting aside his worries, Shen QingQiu rubbed the wounds for a while and then attempted to send a slow stream of spiritual energy into Lo Binghe from his palm. Oh! Ah! Lo Binghe cried out again. Shen QingQiu was confused. How can you make such a fuss? You've entirely lost your sense of decorum. Can you claim to be a disciple of my Qijing Peak with such manners? This disciple is fine now that the medicine's been applied, Lo Binghe said in a quivering voice. Shizun doesn't need to waste his energy. Shen QingQiu's right palm pressed seamlessly against the bare skin of Lo Binghe's back as it moved slowly. Does this feel all right? Lo Binghe didn't speak. He seemed to be biting his lip. Shen QingQiu had one hand on his waist as he massaged, light and gentle, but internally he was confused. Did it not feel good? That couldn't be. He hadn't misremembered the body's acupoints, and the level of spiritual energy ought to be just right. The bruises faded by quite a bit as well, so why did Lo Binghe seem so agonized? It couldn't be. Was Shen QingQiu one of those people who was all thumbs? Oh my God! Shen QingQiu! What? He withdrew his hand, and Lo Binghe breathed a sigh of relief, his eyes bloodshot. He could never have predicted that in the next moment he'd be yanked into someone's arms and wholly enveloped into an embrace. While holding Lo Binghe, QingQiu lay down on the couch. Lo Binghe sounded like he was about to breathe his last. Oh, Shizun! Shizun! QingQiu hadn't removed his inner robes, but there was only a thin layer between them as their heartbeats pounded against one another. There was a greater contact area within an embrace, hence the amount of spiritual energy that could be transmitted was also greater. It wouldn't be fast enough to only use my palm, said QingQiu. If we could stay like this for a moment, once this master's meridians finish circulating a few times, your wounds will be about healed as well. It'll be far more effective than any medicine. Lo Binghe thrashed about in his arms like a little hedgehog. Oh, Shizun, I'm covered in medicine. The friction from his struggling incited a fire within QingQiu, an emotional fire. He gave Lo Binghe's behind a firm warning slap. What are you squirming for? He asked in manner dignified. I'm treating you. Be good. After that slap, which was neither light nor hard, Lo Binghe stiffened into a stick being roasted over an open flame, at that long suffering and tortured. Shizun, this isn't appropriate, said the stick. Let me go. Lo Binghe, if you were Ying, this master would obviously never do something like this, even if you weren't squirming about so much, said QingQiu. But you aren't a young maiden. Are you afraid this master will eat you? At this, Lo Binghe indeed stopped squirming, though his point of focus had stayed. Shizun is saying that he wouldn't do this to Ning Shiji? If the person injured that night had been Ning Yingying, even if you'd given QingQiu 100 shots of courage, he would never dared to use this method of treatment. Unfortunately, he couldn't loudly proclaim his shining purity and perfect sincerity to the entire world. Well, of course not, he said resolutely. Then Lo Binghe said, well then, if it weren't Ning Shiji, but another disciple who'd been injured, would Shizun do this? QingQiu paused. What nonsense is going through your head? Calm your mind and breathe. The hedgehog in his arms finally settled down. Satisfied, QingQiu picked the most comfortable position he could and hooked his chin over Lo Binghe's head. Freeing up one hand, he used it to trace down his disciple's spine, gently stroking it over and over in a pacifying manner. He didn't get to be comfortable for very long when holding Lo Binghe began to grow difficult. The youth was boiling hot, as if he'd just emerged from a steamer. The sweat from his upper body had practically soaked through QingQiu's inner robe. QingQiu was astounded. Surely the spiritual energy he'd sent Lo Binghe hadn't managed to give him a fever. He was about to yank Lo Binghe's face up to study his complexion, but what he got was a handful of fine sweat, thick and slick and slippery. The body within his embrace suddenly began to thrash with all its might. Like a great white fish out of water, Lo Binghe slid out of his arms and fell off the bamboo couch with a crash. It didn't stop there. What followed was a terrible sounding clang and then a crash and a bang. Lo Binghe kicked over the stool and knocked his head into the screen. Then, like he'd gone mad, he crawled and rolled to his feet and rushed out of the bamboo house. At the end of the whole spectacle, QingQiu was left frozen stiff on the couch. For a while, he sat there in utter bewilderment before he finally defrosted, jumping off the couch and chasing after him. Lo Binghe! Lo Binghe had already sprinted several meters ahead, and as he ran, he yelled, I'm sorry, Shizun! QingQiu's expression was dark with dismay. What are you sorry for? Get back here already. On the night wind came a distant, teary voice. I can't! Shizun, I can't see you right now. Don't come near me. Absolutely don't come near me. What on earth had possessed him? Oh my God, we're going to talk about this, but, okay. Okay. Logically, QingQiu's cultivation outstripped Lo Binghe's by quite a bit. And he was categorically faster as well, but whether due to an adrenaline rush on Lo Binghe's part or some other factor, he simply couldn't catch up. The two of them dashed along the roads while shouting at each other. Within a few moments, the entirety of Qijing Peak had been jolted awake. Lamps everywhere lit up in twos and threes. A herd of disciples carrying lights flocked together in great numbers. Well, who's yelling so loudly at this night, disturbing the tranquility of Qijing Peak? Well, that voice sounds like Shizun. Nonsense. How could Shizun do something so uncouth? That last voice had yet to finish when QingQiu flew past them like a gust of wind, his face expressionless. For a moment, everything was utterly silent. QingQiu worried that Lo Binghe's mindless running, he'd failed to watch his step and would wind up falling off a cliff. He took a deep breath and yelled, Mingfan, stop him! Stop Lo Binghe! Mingfan had just thrown on an outer robe and was walking over with a lantern. He stared at the sight and gasped. That bastard Lo Binghe was sprinting away, full of terror, while Shizun chased after him, rolling with murderous intent. This scene, everything had finally returned to normal. Oh, ecstatic, he yelled. Shazoon, this disciple will assist you. We'll grab that brat and teach him a lesson. Come, my Shidi, get him. Oh, they think it's going to be just like the old QingQiu, but that's not the case at all. While his disciples rushed over from all directions, QingQiu finally caught up to the wild runaway horse that was Lo Binghe. Okay, that's where our skin Zune comes from. Before he could grab the kid by the collar and pick him up, Lo Binghe refused to submit and threw himself forward with all his might. With a splash, water sprayed everywhere. Lo Binghe had hurled himself into the clear, tranquil pond on Qijing Peak. With this action, he seemed to have hurled himself into clear-headedness. His entire body now soaked in cold water. He finally stopped moving. So basically, he got a boner from the actions that QingQiu took, which we'll talk about in the discussion. And he threw himself into the cold ponds to shrink said heavenly pillar. Calm down yet? Said QingQiu. Lo Binghe ducked his head down hard and then raised both hands, covering his face with them. Meanwhile, Mingfan was so moved to tears that tears were streaming down his face. A Lo Binghe drenched in cold water, shivering and looking like he'd been viciously beaten. A Shazoon with his arms crossed, standing across from him with a chilly smile. Ah, such a warm, familiar scene! Such a nostalgic sight! A group of disciples surrounded Lo Binghe while whispering to one another. Lo Binghe was still within the pool, silent with his hands over his face. As a girl, Ning Ying always needed more time to dress and comb her hair, so she arrived late. The moment she did, she greeted this sight, and she was blurted out in shock. Hello! Why are you sitting in a pond? Who is bullying you this time? Shazoon, what's happening here? QingQiu was silent before he said coldly, This master also wishes to know exactly who is at fault and what is going on. Lo Binghe shook his head, his face still covered. No one's to blame, and nothing happened. QingQiu stood at the edge of the pond for a while and then suddenly sighed. Get up. What are you doing still standing in there? Lo Binghe continued to shake his head. Oh no, Shazoon, I'll stay here. Just let me stay here for a while. It was winter and it was freezing. There might not have been snow, but if Lo Binghe was allowed to stay in the icy pond like this the whole night, did he want to die? QingQiu lifted at his hem, ready to enter the water and pull him out. Oh, Shazoon, don't come in! Lo Binghe said hastily. The water is cold and dirty. Don't get wet. QingQiu had already waded through the water to his side, crossing the distance of 3 steps in 2. There he stared down at him severely. Lo Binghe's head drooped even further. He didn't dare meet QingQiu's eyes and instead sank deeper into the water. Do you need this master to help you out too? Said QingQiu. Lo Binghe was silent and then said, Shazoon, just let me stay here by myself. QingQiu was at the end of his rope with this kid. He steadied himself and suddenly turned to Qijing Peak's disciples who were watching them. What are you looking at? He said sternly. Disperse and return to your rooms. Go to sleep. The group jostled back and forth, but they loitered, unwilling to leave. You'll wake at 3 for morning classes, says QingQiu. Anyone who's late will be copying scrolls 100 times. 3? But it was already past 1 in the morning. Copying scrolls 100 times? The moment these words left his mouth, the shore of the pond emptied of people like clouds swept away by the wind. Once QingQiu was sure no one was watching, he turned around and stooped down, moving to lift Lo Binghe under his back and the crook of his knees. Realizing what he wanted to do, Lo Binghe acted increasingly like a giant white fish, hiding and splashing within the water. Oh, Shazoon, don't do this! QingQiu was sprayed by a face full of water. His robes were thoroughly drenched. He wiped at his face with a sleeve. Well, haven't you kicked up enough nonsense tonight? When Lo Binghe no longer dared to move, QingQiu steeled himself and lifted Lo Binghe up and into his arms. A little heavy, having muttered that in his heart, QingQiu carried Lo Binghe back in the direction of the bamboo house. Halfway there, Lo Binghe suddenly spoke from his arms with a pained expression. Oh, Shazoon, I'll return to the woodshed. Lo Binghe, exactly what has gotten into you tonight? QingQiu said severely. Being all timid and evasive, even running away with all your might. An outsider didn't know what was going on, would imagine that this master had done something unforgivable to you. The Lo Binghe of that night had truly disgraced himself and destroyed his own reputation. A dark past. That was 100% Lo Binghe's dark past. Later, QingQiu had at times recalled the incident and used it to tease Lo Binghe. But Lo Binghe wouldn't even blush. He'd truly grown up, and his face had grown thicker too. I was at the age when one is most susceptible to passions, he would explain. The person I most admired held me in his arms, and he both hugged and rubbed himself against me. Shizun, how could you ask me to keep myself under control? Having realized my feelings, I was unable to control my body's reactions, but I was afraid that you'd notice. What could I have done other than make a fool of myself? When he recalled Lo Binghe saying those words, along with how his face had revealed some rarely seen hints of genuine shyness, Shen couldn't help but smile. He smiled and smiled, but then he couldn't anymore. He dared not think about how the Lo Binghe before him was feeling now, as he held Shen body in his arms. This dream realm, which Shen couldn't leave, was both drawn out and monotonous, exactly how Lo Binghe's life at Huan Palace had been. Lo Binghe had spent over half the hours of the day huddling inside the frigid Huan pavilion. He'd even brought all his documents inside to deal with them there. Shen rarely got to see Lo Binghe working so seriously. Most of the time, Lo Binghe's behavior in front of him was a little odd, like a love-sick young girl from head to toe. And when Lo Binghe was handling important demonic affairs, Shen consciously practiced avoidance, making sure not to disturb him. On the occasions he intruded, Lo Binghe immediately lost interest in his work, throwing aside the heaping mountain of documents upon his desk in favor of appealing to Shen as he acted all lovable and obedient. To think that it was only inside this dream realm that he could carefully observe what Lo Binghe was like when he was alone and diligently handling official business. Shen took to sitting next to Lo Binghe's desk, where he would marvel as he stared at the quiet, serious side profile. Lo Binghe would slightly frown, reading 10 lines at a glance, his brushstroke swift and accurate. The instructions he left were comprehensive yet concise, his ink sparingly used. In short, he worked with a level of gravitas that could scarce be believed. He also kept his old habit of cooking every day. Exquisite snacks in the morning, 4 side dishes with a soup at noon, and a bowl of congee in the evening. Snow-white rice, deep green scallions, light yellow shredded ginger. It was the same as that first bowl Lo Binghe had ever made for him. It'd be poured inside a snowy porcelain dish, and once the drifting steam faded, Lo Binghe would personally arrange everything inside a lunchbox, which he would deliver to the pavilion. Even without anyone to appreciate his efforts, he insisted on making everything just like how he had at Qijing Peak. It was as if he was waiting for the day that Shen would suddenly awaken and open his eyes. That way, the food would be available straight away and he wouldn't need to wait. Sometimes Lo Binghe would leave for half the day. Most of the time it would be to address trouble and demon side of things that no one else could handle, so Lo Binghe would have to personally deal with it himself. He pretty much never got hurt, and then one day he hit a jackpot and came back bloody. Lo Binghe walked to the doors at first, but then, as if he'd suddenly thought of something, he backed up a great many steps and removed his blood-stained outer robe. Expelling a little energy from his hand, he set it aflame, burning it away completely. Only after making sure there was no blood on himself did he approach the sitting platform, so that none of the demon blood could infect the body just in case. His expression was the same as ever, and he said to the body on the platform, "Shizun, something came up and caused a delay. This disciple ended up returning late, so there won't be any kanji." Naturally, no one replied, which highlighted the way in which this situation was just a little comical. Shen felt a bit stuck, unable to either laugh or cry. Ha ha ha! Get that heaven official's blessing. But his heart twinged, a sour feeling within it. He replied, "It's fine that there isn't." Over these days in the dream, he'd become in the habit of speaking to himself. Separated as they were by time and space, Lo Binghe couldn't hear him, and Shen couldn't touch him either, but in the end, he still wished to answer. Lo Binghe stood there for a time and then said, "Never mind." He turned around and left. After a while, he returned to the doors with a steaming hot bowl of congee. He placed it down on the desk in passing and then began to slowly and methodically remove his clothing. Liu Qingge rescued Mu Qingfang. Shen made a sound of acknowledgement. Lo Binghe continued talking to himself. "It's fine that he's been rescued. At any rate, Mu Qingfang only ever said there's no way. He's totally useless." "How can you badmouth your Shiju like that?" said Shen Lo Binghe removed his outer robe. Upon his chest was a wound that was slowly healing. Shen could tell at a glance that the gash that had been caused by Liu Qingge's sword glare. Beneath this new wound was the old one, ever stubborn and resilient, unwilling to fade. Lo Binghe lay down and rolled over, putting that body into his arms. In the past, when Bison Peak came and knocked me around, Shizun would always come up with a method to take revenge for me. When will Shizun do the same and exact revenge on Liu Qingge himself? QingQiu sat upon the sitting platform. Well, that's impossible. I can't defeat him. Shizun. Shizun, I can't hold on for much longer. QingQiu didn't speak. Binghe smiled. It's true, Shizun. If you don't wake up soon, I won't be able to hold on for much longer. But QingQiu knew that he would hold on. He would hold that ice-cold, lifeless corpse and hold on for almost 2,000 more of these days and nights. His heart ached with an overwhelming pain, so much that it exploded within his chest. QingQiu saw a hand stretching forward, futilely trying to touch that stark white face of Binghe's. He watched that hand as it trembled, unable to touch anything, and then he suddenly realized with a shock that it was his own. Shizun. Shizun. In his daze, QingQiu felt someone grasping his shoulders as they sat up, and he drowsily opened his eyes. Binghe's face was inches from his face, nervously staring at him in concern. Shizun, what's wrong? QingQiu had yet to recollect himself mentally, and he stared at him blankly. At the sight of this, Binghe became increasingly anxious. That the day before, he'd reached a critical point in his cultivation. That night, he'd shut off his consciousness and so had no opportunity to control his dream realm. After falling into a troubled sleep, he'd been shocked awake in the middle of the night. Next to him, QingQiu's brow had been tightly knit, his forehead dripping with sweat. Binghe knew something was wrong. He realized he must have failed to restrain his powers and forced Shizun to be trapped in a nightmare. Well, he was terrified that QingQiu might have had an exceptionally terrifying dream because of them. Shizun, what were you dreaming of just now? He asked persistently. Are you injured? QingQiu stayed within that dream for too long, and his soul had yet to make all the way back. As he looked at Binghe's face, it seemed both real and yet not, and his vision wavered. At times blurred and at times cleared. He didn't know what to say. Binghe became even more frantic and raised his voice. Oh, Shizun, say something! Suddenly, inspiration struck QingQiu. He blinked and then he pulled Binghe's face down and kissed him. Binghe was speechless. Though he had no idea what was going on, the sudden kiss made him intensely happy, and his eyes opened very wide. In the next moment, his hand pressed against the back of QingQiu's neck as he took the initiative to deepen the kiss. QingQiu didn't stop there. After some rustling, he'd already unfastened Binghe's sash and grabbed his hand, moving it inside to his own open collar. He led it along the firm lines of his chest, all the way to his enthusiastically pounding heart. At this point, Binghe seemed a little shocked by his indulgence. He didn't dare to be too impatient or impulsive, and his movements became cautious. However, during this moment of slight hesitation, QingQiu had flipped them over, pressing Binghe beneath him as he roughly tore open his inner robes. Binghe, breathing, was a little unsteady as he held QingQiu's waist, a faint flush dyeing his cheek. Shizun, he stammered. What's gotten into you tonight? QingQiu leaned down and said into his ear, Tonight, I feel like I like you a great deal. In an instant, Binghe's entire body went rigid from head to toe. He abruptly sat up and trapped QingQiu within his arms. Lightly drawing a breath, he said, Shizun, I might not be able to be gentle. At the sound of the forced calm in his voice, QingQiu laughed. You speak as if it doesn't hurt when you are gentle. Before Binghe's face had the chance to change, QingQiu was reaching out with both hands. I'll endure it gladly. All right! Okay! Well, all right, that's building my trust back up just a little bit. Okay. Well, all right. Okay. All right, that was a better chapter than last week already. Good deal. Good deal. Okay. Well then, we still got one more chapter to go, y'all. Part 28. So that was just one part in itself. Okay. Chapter 88, Return to Childhood. When he woke, QingQiu slowly turned over in bed, but he didn't find an arm locked around his waist like he usually did. The light of dawn spilled in from beyond the window. He covered his eyes with the sleeve of his inner robe, but this single movement made his waist and back begin to ache and his arm feel weak. A faint, tearing pain came from a certain part of his lower half, accompanied by the strange sensation of some dry, sticky liquid. After last night's whole stretch of nonsense, waking up had come with a wave of consequences. Wondering why Lo Binghe hadn't woken at the crack of dawn to clean him up and make breakfast on the way, QingQiu rasped, "Binghe! Binghe!" No one responded. Even more confused, QingQiu forced his eyes open and looked down, only to find a small head with a curtain of soft black hair. QingQiu was speechless. The owner of this small head had a cute and pretty face, with a natural flush on his pale and tender cheeks. A long, thick curtain of lush black eyelashes, tightly shut eyes, and pale pink lips. The person was also curled up in a ball like a kitten by QingQiu's side, his head pillowed on his own arm. Even though this person wasn't the same size, and even though he looked to be about 5 or 6 years old at the most, and even though there were no more even those. Even if he shrunk to another size, QingQiu could absolutely still recognize him at first glance. This was the face of the great male protagonist. With a shudder, his voice jumped to an octave. "Lo Binghe! Hi, Heaven Official's blessing plotline! What are we doing here?" He was going to try pinching his own arm to see if he could pinch himself awake, but as soon as he sprang up, that ache in his lower half sent him collapsing stiffly back down. Still curled up in a little ball, Lo Binghe's lashes trembled, and he slowly drifted awake. With a red mark across one half of his face, from his own arm, he squished... Oh, I've done that before. He squished at QingQiu's half-dressed form across the bed and reached for him in a give-me-a-hug gesture. "Shazoon." The voice was soft and squishy, so tender and sweet that it practically dripped. Accordingly, Lo Binghe froze as soon as he opened his mouth. They gave each other a blank stare. After a period of chaotic fumbling, they finally managed to sort out what exactly had happened. Lo Binghe had been at a critical juncture in his cultivation lately. The common wisdom was that he should have been clearing his mind and keeping himself pure of base desires in order to prevent any mishaps from occurring. Yet, the evening prior, he had lost control and rolled around with QingQiu all night, and finally, he'd suffered a chi deviation. QingQiu didn't find this at all difficult to accept because this plotline had occurred in the original text of Proud Immortal Demon Way. Of course, Airplane Shooting Towards the Sky hadn't written the arc for cute fluff, but rather because the de-aged Lo Binghe had been able to openly strut into all sorts of locations an adult man couldn't enter. Exactly what those locations were, one could imagine for oneself. And such little kids are way better at lowering young women's guards, so they could proceed to have... What?! So they could proceed to have intimate contact, and then right when they least expect it, he'd win them over in a single blow. This plot line had taken up so long to show up that QingQiu thought it had been skipped. He never expected that it had been unable to occur on time. QingQiu pressed a hand to his forehead. "How much of your martial aspect remains?" "Not even a tenth." Lo Binghe had a stern expression written all over his youthful face. Not only did it fail to convey the severity of the situation, it was instead extremely funny. So QingQiu very uncharitably began to laugh. After he was done laughing, he rearranged his face into a serious expression and said with a cough, "Just 1/10? All right, well then we can't stay in the demon realm." Lo Binghe had been offended more than a few humans and demons both. At this sort of time, the obvious next move was to flee as far away from possible and hide as well as they could. QingQiu's first thought was therefore to grab Chibi Lo Binghe and make a run for it ASAP. Having made up his mind, he went to get up and get dressed, only for his face to twitch in pain again as he straightened his back. Every time before, after they finished, Lo Binghe had carried him into the hot springs while he was still deep asleep and helped him clean up. But now, Lo Binghe could at the most cling to one of QingQiu's legs, much less haul him anywhere. Lo Binghe crouched down next to him, his huge eyes on the verge of tears. QingQiu was silent for a moment and comforted him. "Oh, forget it, it's fine, I can do it myself." In the deepest part, in the middle of the natural hot springs Lo Binghe had dug in the underground palace, the water rose past QingQiu's chest. If he tossed Chibi Lo Binghe into it, he'd immediately be submerged up to his head. So QingQiu had to carefully sit down on the round stones along the edge while holding him, and he even instructed him to sit tight as to not slip. He was about to start giving himself a cursory cleaning when he saw Lo Binghe straining to reach a nearby chunk of limestone to try and hand him the box of soap that was there, but no matter how far he stretched, he fell short. This scene reminded him of Lo Binghe crouched in a valley when he had first arrived at Sangjiang Mountain to seek tutelage, a patched-up cloth bundle on his back as he assiduously dug holes. QingQiu looked at him for a while and couldn't resist pulling him into his arms. Expressionless, he began to squish and tug at Lo Binghe's face. While subjected to this aggressive harassment, Lo Binghe inhaled a few gulps of water. His skin had already had a faint flush from the warm steam, and with his struggle, his entire body practically turned pink. In a surge of emotion, Lo Binghe instinctively grabbed QingQiu's wrist and tried to shove him down against the limestone. Though QingQiu considerately cooperated and let Lo Binghe shove him down, Lo Binghe's pretty face went instantly dark. With his body, even if he shoved QingQiu down 1,000, 10,000 times, there would be no point. He couldn't do anything about it. At the sight of Lo Binghe's face going from red to white to dark, QingQiu practically gave himself an internal injury from trying not to laugh. You were so impetuous when tormenting this master last night. Suffering the consequences today, are you? Wasn't it Shizun who seduced this disciple first? Lo Binghe cried out, betrayed. This made QingQiu's face flare red as he internally gasped in shame. He righted his expression and quickly let go. Caught off guard, Lo Binghe slipped into the water, disappearing in a stream of bubbles. QingQiu's preferences being what they were, the first haven he thought of was naturally Sangjiang Mountain, but Lo Binghe would rather have died than to go back there. That was about right. As of now, with Lo Binghe's martial aspect damaged, he definitely would get hounded by onlookers if they went, and Liu Qingge would definitely be within that crowd. So, QingQiu compromised and just brought him to the human realm. As they say, the greatest form of solitude is solitude within a city. Thus, they settled in an especially prosperous town. While Lo Binghe was repairing his martial aspect, they would take up residence there to pass the time. QingQiu soon got so bored that his bones began to itch, and he casually took up work at the largest academy in the city. Just casually, just walked in and got the job. No big deal. Naturally, Lo Binghe was unhappy with this. First of all, he disliked it when QingQiu took other disciples. Wasn't that throng of disciples on Xijing Peak enough for him, and now he was taking more? Second of all, he even disliked it even more when people assumed that he was QingQiu's son. Especially because every time they got into bed at night, he was kissed and hugged and he couldn't do anything at all. He even had to listen to QingQiu teasingly call him a good boy and my little darling. More and more, he came to hate his own lack of ability. When QingQiu returned from the academy one day, he saw that Lo Binghe had brought a stool to the doorway and was sitting there waiting for him, an aloof and unfathomable expression on his face. If you swapped him with the adult version, this sight would naturally have made one shrink back in fear, trembling in his boots. But what about when he was the wrong size? All he did was make it irresistible to reach out with a pair of fingers to pinch his wee face. No matter the depths of refusal he summoned to his face, even the little chirping sparrows surrounding him couldn't stop building dirt castles all around his stool. One after the other, they occasionally tried to cajole him with their games. Said sparrows were the neighboring family's kids. Since the first day Lo Binghe and QingQiu moved in, the children had submitted to the male protagonist's charisma halo and clung to him like nothing else. Oh my God! He couldn't even chase them away! Fortunately, they were all afraid of QingQiu. Every child was afraid of a teacher. So as soon as they saw him return, the flock scattered. Thus, QingQiu gracefully extended his fingers and moved to claim his usual pinch of Lo Binghe's cheek. Then a series of bright, crisp voices called "Xin Xiangsheng" from behind him, and a few graceful figures decked out in silver and gold walked into the courtyard uninvited. QingQiu turned and saw that the newcomers were a few of the town's rather energetic married ladies. He gave them a nod, but before he could offer a greeting, the one in the lead strode up and caught his arm, whereupon she tried to drag him out and away. "Oh, Xin Xiangsheng, we've been looking for you all day. Come on. Come with me quick. That girl's going to go mad waiting." "Go where?" Lo Binghe snapped. "What girl?" QingQiu was also confused. Lady A, startled by Lo Binghe's dark expression, fanned herself and let out a sign of surprise. "Such a little one, yet he's so scary when he talks. Whatever is the young master so angry about?" "Xin Xiangsheng, is he mad at you?" Lady B bustled over. Here, come over here, young master. Binghe has some candy for you. Don't get in your daddy's way." Lo Binghe ignored them and assumed a cold look. Did you make any plans today?" I don't remember." Lady A tutted him. Oh, Shen Jiangzhang, you know perfectly well. And you still ask. Do you have to make me say it clearly? Fine, fine. I have a niece in my family, an excellent and respectable girl. I thought you two would be such a good match. So we've arranged a banquet at the Changji Pavilion to let you get to know each other. And the girl from my family. And my cousin too. It looked like everything happened fast in lively places. QingQiu hadn't been here very long, but all the residents of the city were already talking about how there was a new scholar in town, and not only was he well-read and highly talented, polite and soft-spoken, he also had a handsome and elegant appearance and was very refreshing. Of course, this was all superficial. The most important thing was that he had to be rich, stinking rich. He'd thrown down money for a respectable courtyard all at once. How could he have managed that if he wasn't rich? And he'd even come with a 4 or 5-year-old son, and what a pure and adorable child he was. Already a handsome sprout at this age, he would certainly develop into an elegant and dignified gentleman in the future. How devastating. Anyone with an unmarried daughter or suitable age or newborn daughter without any arranged betrothal, oh my God, would be raring to snag them. A match with either the elder or the younger, neither would be a bad deal. Lo Binghe's face was green with rage. He doesn't need matchmaking. His rightful partner wasn't dead yet. Lady C strolled over, swaying her hips. Little young Master Shen, do you not want your daddy to marry a new wife? Won't it be good to have a gentle, pretty new mom to take care of you? That's right, Lady B added. Shen Jiangzhang, you can't spoil your son like this. I hear you even bring him with you to the academy and he sits on your lap. You don't have to take it from me, but if you pamper him this much, you won't raise him into a good man. My son, you see... At the sight of Lo Binghe on the verge of flattening this entire courtyard with a flick of his arm, QingQiu hurriedly picked him up and retreated. This Shen accepts all of your good intentions. I do not plan on restringing my chin, as it were. I have no one at home and a young son to look after, so please forgive me if for my inability to accept your invitation. What is Shen Jiangshang saying? Asked Lady A, who wore a large red peony pinned at her temple, and she spoke with a righteous vigor. Men and women ought to get married when they come of age. And you have such a large residence, how can it go without a young lady to attend the house? By what logic ought a person of such character and elegant demeanor be all alone with a single child? Not only will you be uncomfortable, it won't look good. People will talk. Lady A waved her round fan, brooking no resistance. It's a date. Xinjiang, you are coming with us right now. The little young master can stay home. Someone will keep him company. Lo Binghe sneered. Just who do you think is going to leave? QingQiu wasn't able to keep up with this savage charm for long. In consideration for the lives of the 3 eager matchmakers and everyone else in town, he flung out a few talismans to render them unconscious, abandoned the residence he had bought not even a month ago, and fled. The only place that he could flee back to was Sangjiang Mountain. Leading Lo Binghe by hand, QingQiu started up the mountain steps. The man sweeping the stairs did his work as diligently and earnestly as he had always had in his 10-some years. As QingQiu strolled up, their eyes met, and he gave the man a faint smile. QingQiu was about to greet him when the man looked at him, then at Lo Binghe holding his hand, and his face twitched. All of a sudden, he tossed aside the broom that was as tall as he was and sprinted up the steps like his rear end was on fire. In a flash, he was hundreds of steps away, and in addition to the shock, QingQiu felt a sense of pride. That was Sangjiang Mountain for you. Even the stair sweeper was a hidden master. The stairway was lengthy, and before they had gone halfway up, Lo Binghe had begun to yawn. He was low on strength at present, and so it was unavoidable that he grew tired easily. QingQiu picked him up. Get some sleep. Getting a read on a disciple's heart was like finding a proverbial needle in a haystack. Sometimes Lo Binghe was willing to be picked up, but sometimes his entire face would go red and he would struggle out of QingQiu's hold, preferring to walk himself. Now he was probably truly exhausted. He curled up in QingQiu's arms, his eyes shut for a while, and just like that, he fell asleep. Once he'd climbed the heavy ascending stairs, QingQiu sensed strange gazes directed at him, as soon as he stepped into the main plaza, and he heard a surge of whispering from all around. The stair sweeper started down again, hugging his broom, and gave him an especially strange look on the way. QingQiu walked up to Qijing Peak, holding Lo Binghe. At the doorway of the bamboo house, all the disciples rushed over in a frenzy. As soon as Ming Fan saw Lo Binghe curled up in QingQiu's arms, he looked as if he had been punched in the solar plexus or struck by lightning. While others fought their way forward, he staggered back. Ning Ying shoved aside. He probably thinks it's like Shen Qingqiu's child somehow. Ning Ying shoved aside the people in front of her and stared at Lo Binghe deep asleep in Shen Qingqiu's arms and covered her mouth. He looks like Alo. He looks like Alo. Nonsense. If he didn't look like Lo Binghe, who else would he look like? Ning Ying grabbed Shen Qingqiu's sleeves in excitement. Oh, Shizun, does he have a name? Did you name him yet? Shen Qingqiu was perplexed. If he doesn't have a name, can I give him one? What the hell? Lo Binghe shifted restlessly in his arms and mumbled, loud. Shen Qingqiu raised his folding fan threateningly in midair and then jerked it back to make a shush gesture. Then the door of the bamboo house came crashing down. Lo Binghe jerked and opened his eyes, startled awake. Liu Qingge strode in like a flying meteor. Shen Qingqiu sent a death glare at the furtive-looking Ming Fan, shifted Lo Binghe behind him, and gave Liu Qingge a fake smile. Liu Shide, long time no see. What are you hiding for? Liu Qingge snapped. Hiding what? Shen Qingqiu replied, I'm not hiding. Lo Binghe planted a hand on Shen Qingqiu's chest. There's no need to hide. I'm not afraid of him. Liu Qingge walked over and glared down at the challenge written all over Lo Binghe's little face. After a long time, he managed to stammer out, as if he was forcibly suppressing some emotion. When did they what? What had they done? Liu Qingge seemed to find it difficult to speak. So Ming Fan cried out in his place, when did you have a son with him? He's so big! Silence. Great Master, Liu. Airplane shooting towards the sky didn't write a green Xinjiang impreg novel. Oh my god! Well, after very impolitely blasting Great Master Liu off of Qijing Peak, Shen Qingqiu still felt like he was numb from a particularly electric shock. How can a man give birth to a child? Having been told the true sequence of events, Ning Ying now knew the child Shen Qingqiu had carried back wasn't his own baby. She was greatly disappointed. And she felt that her heart, full of passion, and the 50-some names she'd come up with had gone to waste. It was the stair sweeper Gege who went around telling everyone, she said, pouting. We all assumed it was true. Who could have thought that Ah Lo could have suffered a chi deviation? Stair sweeper, how talented. Not only are you fast, your galaxy-level brain delusions are always so unique. Shen Qingqiu will remember this. This disciple thought that when it came to the demon race, making a man give birth to a child wouldn't be outside the realm of possibility, Ming Fan said awkwardly. Everyone vigorously nodded. Shen Qingqiu suffered even further mental collapse as he attempted to argue for logic. Well, even if I did, a kid wouldn't have grown this big in a few short months. Who knows, Ming Fan said. We disciples thought that if it was that monster Lo Binghe's child, it wouldn't be impossible for a kid to be that big even when they were born. Shen Qingqiu was speechless. That night, Qijing Peak's long-abandoned mass book-copying punishments made a grand reappearance. It was a rare occasion that Shen Qingqiu managed to make time to return to Sangjiang Mountain while the 12 Peak Lords were all in one place. Naturally, they had to get together for a meeting or a meal. It had been a long time since Shen Qingqiu had sat, doing his poser act, in the second chair of the rear hall of Xiongding Hall. He missed the sensation. He nodded at and greeted the Peak Lords one by one, exchanging a series of, it's been a long time, hope you've been well, and same to yous. He snapped open his fan, his face brimming with joy. Yu Qingyan's expression seemed to be a bit strange when he saw Shen Qingqiu, but he didn't say much. He just sat down at the head sect, smiled at him, and then placed a stack of files on the table. Shang Qinghua scurried up to collect and distribute them to everyone else. Shen Qingqiu accepted the list from Shang Qinghua, but first he gave him a cursory glance. There was no telling what Shang Qinghua had done to piss off Mo Beijun this time, but the corner of his lip was swelling as he gave Shen Qingqiu a pathetic smile. Oh, Shen Qingqiu couldn't bear to look, so he shifted his gaze back to the file. The key points of discussion had already been marked in bold cinnabar red. With the first glance, the sip of tea he had just drunk spewed out of his mouth. First, I haven't done the voice in a while, so I want to do the voice. First, aggressively restrict access to the copies of Regret of Chun-shan, Song of Binghe, etc. Forbid the distribution of any edition on any occasion, whether public or private. Set a 1-month deadline for copies to be turned over, after which anyone found to be in possession of or circulating copies will be severely punished. Punishment shall be increased by 1 level for illustrations. Second, because of numerous complaints, the relevant leadership of Bison Peak shall tighten their supervision. Inter-peak brawls are strictly prohibited. Third, because of a small number of complaints, Qijing Peak shall take note of the time when practicing the chin. Please avoid the noon break and night times. Fourth, Shanshu Peak requests permission to fortify and increase the height of their fences, and petitions for their fences to be electrified. Fifth, Kujing Peak's numbers have dwindled over the years, and they request permission to increase their recruitment efforts. They petition for first rights to select new disciples the next time the mountain gates are opened. Sixth, the peak lords must increase attention on education on each peak. Sect members must not fight publicly with Huanhua Palace disciples while identified as Sangjiang Mountain disciples. Seventh, if demons are encountered while carrying out missions, do not rashly attack. Make sure to ascertain their lineage and affiliated division before deciding whether to fight. Spitting out one's tea in front of everyone was extremely improper behavior, but QingQiu didn't need to worry about this failure of etiquette because after reading the first item on the agenda, most of the other peak lords also spat out their tea. Given his surroundings, he didn't stand out very much. The meeting room sank into an awkward confusion. Even if QingQiu fanned hard enough to raise the wind and waves, he failed to fan away any of the miasma. By what great merit had the Regret of Chun-shan come to be first on the list? And what the hell was this new one, Song of Binghe? After the meeting concluded, QingQiu began to sulkily head towards Qijing Peak, but before he got very far, he realized quite a few of the peak lords were following him. Shidi and Shimei, I believe the way back to your peaks does not lie in this direction, QingQiu said amicably. Well, that's because I wasn't going back to my peak in the first place, said QingQiu. QingQiu had known this hurdle was coming, but still made a valiant attempt to clear it. Why have you suddenly thought to come visit Qijing Peak? My bamboo house is simple and crude. I'm afraid I cannot provide ample hospitality. What are you playing dumb for? I know your bamboo house is simple and crude. Who wants to visit you? I'm obviously going to see that darling disciple you've hidden away. Everyone in the crowd was eagerly plotting to gawk at Lo Binghe like he was some rare curiosity. Helpless, QingQiu said, he'll be angry. You don't have to take it from me, Xinzhizhang. But how does a disciple like him dare to be angry with his Shizun? Do you not discipline him properly? That won't do. No matter what your relationship is now, you should keep up discipline when it's due. So what if he's angry? What's there to be afraid of? Lo Binghe's powers are less than 1/10 of its usual. If we don't anger him now, when else can we? Because of his aesthetic lifestyle, Kujing Peak Lord had a fiery temperament, and he was impatient after having failed to acquire the selection priority that he wanted. Enough with this blathering. Are you just afraid we'll empty out your stock of tea? We're coming! We're coming! QingQiu knew there was no escape, and his face darkened as he was dragged towards Qijing Peak. How do you guys know the situation so well? It's like you know it even better than me. He could maybe hold off 1 or 2 of them, but when several peak lords swarmed into the bamboo house all at once, there was nothing he could do to stop them. As soon as Qingqi walked in the door, she lost it and let out a chuckle. Lo Binghe was lying on the bed, deep asleep and tucked in tight, looking just as he had when QingQiu left. QingQiu gestured as if to say, he's asleep. Don't disturb him. Liu Qingge set a glance inside and couldn't resist remarking, why does he look different from yesterday? Different? QingQiu turned, and sure enough, he was different. Lo Binghe seemed to have aged 2 years, and now looked to be about 7 or 8. Admirable growth, Wei Qingwei said. Qingji peered closely at him. At this rate, he's going to grow out of those clothes soon. QingQiu hadn't considered this issue. He pondered this, and then realized that Lo Binghe's clothes truly hadn't fit so well that morning, and a chunk of his wrist was showing. True indeed, I've been careless. I'll take him to buy a few more sets tomorrow. What do you mean, buy? Qingqi asked. Do you not know how to use what we have? Just go to Shanshu Peak and ask a few Jiju and Mei to make some outfits for him. At this, a few of the peak lords rather ungenerously began to chuckle. The vision of a crowd of sweet-smelling immortal ladies surrounding an aggrieved demon cut-sleeve and chirping in their bird-like voices was enough to give these peak lords who had nothing better to do a good laugh. Seeing their glee at kicking Lo Binghe while he was down, QingQiu's heart began to hurt for the dregs of his disciple's dignity. Don't overdo it. Don't overdo it. Let's go and sit in the drawing room. Don't stand around here staring at him. Stop laughing. Careful, you'll wake him up. You wouldn't let us look at him before, and you won't let us look at him now either. Shen Shizhong, you're really such a killjoy. Give me some face. All right. Then Shen Shizhong should come drink with us on Zaijian Peak tonight. I still have to look after Lo Binghe. You used to hole yourself up in here all the time, refusing to budge. And then you got dragged around all over the place. You're finally back for once. So forget the kid. Let's go. Let's get together. You need time for yourself. You can't just orbit around your disciple all day. After QingQiu finally managed to shoo away his sex siblings and return to the bamboo house, he felt as if his head had swelled to full size. Lo Binghe was awake and sitting at his old desk. His legs weren't long enough to reach the ground and hung in midair, and next to him was a pile of documents even taller than he was. He held a brush dipped in red ink as he reviewed some lists and made notes. QingQiu looked at him for a while and then walked in. What are you doing? Lo Binghe looked up. Shizun hasn't been back in a long time, and there was no one to organize the books, so this disciple wanted to make a new catalog and put them in storage. Just get some rest. You don't have to take care of these things. But Shizun wasn't here, and I had nothing else to do. I thought I might as well just do it. QingQiu sat down next to him and thought for a moment, and then asked, are you so unhappy to be back at Qijing Peak? Lo Binghe gave him a faint smile. What is Shizun saying? How could this disciple be unhappy? QingQiu slowly got up and went to head outside, but suddenly he couldn't move his feet. Lo Binghe had jumped down from the table and grabbed onto his legs. You're right, he ground out through gritted teeth. This disciple is unhappy. There you go. If you're unhappy, just say so. From now on, if you have something to say, don't shut it up inside your heart and stifle your feelings. If you really don't like Qijing Peak, we'll leave once you recover to your original form. It's just, in your current state, you're unsuited to constant travel. If anything happens, Sangjiang Mountain can at least protect you. I do like it, but Qijing Peak I like is only Qijing Peak. It's not Sangjiang Mountain, and aside from Shizun and myself, it has no other people. But, QingQiu thought, the Qijing Peak you like has never really existed, has it? Lo Binghe mumbled. Shizun, is it true that being with me has made you lose a lot of opportunities for you to do things for yourself? QingQiu burst out laughing. Well, you put on quite a good act of being asleep. Your ears are sharp too. How much of your martial aspect have you recovered? Shizun, the reason I didn't want to come back wasn't because I don't like this place. Rather, it's too easy for you to be stolen away here, he mumbled, depressed. If I were my actual self, I'd have some confidence that I could steal you back no matter what I had to do. But as my current self, I really feel like I can't win against others. QingQiu rapped on the top of his head. Who asked you to win? You don't need to steal me. Shizun will go with you himself. The appearance of one's conversation partner was truly of utmost importance. If this were the adult version, Lo Binghe, QingQiu wouldn't have said something so nauseatingly frank, even if you held a knife to his throat. But since this was the mini version, who he could pick up in his arms and who was willing to cling to his legs to throw a tantrum to seek comfort, QingQiu was free of all psychological pressures. Lo Binghe lifted his face and gave him an adoring gaze. The flowers were in bloom and the moon was round, and at this fine hour, in this beautiful scene, a faint fragrance floated on the breeze, which set a perfect mood. Anyone's heart would race. Lo Binghe's dewy eyes blazed brighter and brighter, and finally, unable to resist, he shoved QingQiu down on the bamboo couch and pounced. He sprawled out on QingQiu's chest, and the two of them stared at each other. You can continue? But even if they continued, he couldn't do any of the things that he wanted to. QingQiu's expression was full of a sympathy that he couldn't manage to hide. After a while, a howl of unbearable rage escaped from Lo Binghe's still, youthfully tender throat. Okay, so, we gotta stop it there? We're not ready? I wanted them to talk more! Son of a bitch, damn it, no! Give me more! Come on, you two! Talk more, please! It must be a Christmas miracle, because where were these chapters the last 3 weeks? What? These chapters were so much better. I was like, these chapters were so much better, but they felt like okay, so I went back and I redid this list of the chapters, which are a little bit hard to see because of the ring light there, but I'm going to walk you all through it because I was like, these chapters were so much better, and Lo Binghe was so better behaved and decent, and I was like, where did these come from? Because the last set of chapters, he was not like that. He was so much whinier. And these chapters, they were actually doing some communication. There was actually some understanding happening. There were definitely moments where there could be more communication, but it was a lot better. And I was like, what is this? So I tried to go through and look, I don't know. There's only one chapter set on here that I think I might know what is involved in said chapter set, but I don't want to know any spoilers. I don't want any hints or clues. I don't want to know if I'm right or wrong. Y'all will find out rather soon, so it'll be fine. But I organized, Reiki put together a list of the chapters and the page numbers. So what I did was I went through and I separated volume 4 into 10 parts. And I just mainly did it by page numbers, if I'm being honest, because I know the first week we only got to chapter 84 and we didn't quite finish the set, but it was already like 30 some pages. And I was like, I don't want to make it 50. So, or in that case, it would have been like 80 pages. And I was like, no. So I decided to just sort these mainly by page numbers, and to where I was only doing like 30 to 4 pages a week, because as you can see, it's a lot to get through in the extras, which I'm glad about. I'm glad that the extras for this are a lot, because that is the one complaint I have about 7 Seas with Heaven and Vigil's Blessing, is that the final volume is so small compared to the others that it felt like I was just done fast and didn't have a lot of time to sort through it. And this one feels a lot more robust, and I like that about it. So good work, 7 Seas. But anyway, so the chapter set, 7 Seas, has the chapters organized this way, which is weird to me. They start out the last 2 weeks like we did, with chapters 82 through 85 as a section. Chapter 86 is its own story. Then then it jumps to chapter 94 by itself, which is crazy. Then chapters 91 and 92. Then chapter 73 and chapter 95. So that's the only one that I think I know what's to do with it. I think it's going to have something to do with Shinju, because that's the chapter that we skipped back in volume 3. I don't want to know anything else about it. I'm fine with the Shinju chapter when we get to chapter 95 in that one. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. But that's the only one that I kind of have like an inkling of. I think I know what that one's going to be about that week, but that's it. We'll see. Then it goes chapter 96, then 97, 98, then chapter 99. Then they come back and do the chapters we just did today, 87 and 88. Then they do 89 and 90. Then chapter 93. And then chapter 100. I'm like, it's all over the place. But the only thing I can think of is maybe in this section here, maybe Lo Binghe does some maturing, and it's just we get to see more of that in practice, so that by the time we get down to chapters 87 and 88, we see him act better to QingQiu and they start to communicate more. Maybe that's it. Because it felt like a 180 from last week. I was like, why I love this. This is why I wanted last week, but it just feels like I don't know how consistent MXTX is with this story. I was like, girl, you got to make this more consistent. And she does with her later stories, but this first one, trial and error. And the people that said she did this in high school, impressive. Could not write like this in high school, but still I'm like, girl, you got consistency here. But maybe that's it. Maybe the stuff that happens in these chapters is going to be elaborated on when we get there. I don't know. I'm doing the chapters in order like MXTX wrote them. So we started out with the multiverse chapter 82 through 85, which was Lo Binghe versus OG version of himself. Then chapter 86 was the QingQiu and Liu Qingge went off and did their thing. And then we had this dream chapter, which, again, the dream chapter feels like it's just a night and day from chapter 85. Feels like night and day. And chapter 86 was a flashback chapter, so it wasn't really any time of development. So it does feel weird. It does feel like MXTX was trying to like give us, maybe MXTX is like, I tortured you from chapters 80 to 85. So I'm going to give you some nice things. I'm like, cool. And then there's chapter 88, which is Lo Binghe as the kid, which again, we started to get some communication. Good. It feels like the meme where MXTX is like, I gave you some communication between Lo Binghe and QingQiu, and the person comes out and goes, thanks, been waiting on that. That's great. Cool. And I want to talk about it. But yeah. So it just feels like if that was just a blip in the radar and chapters 82 through 85 were just a blip of them just with their rocky start post volume 3, and the rest of this is going to round out and give us some communication and development with their romance. I'm fine with that. Would have been nice to ease into it a little more naturally, but I'm fine with it. But maybe these other chapters, maybe Seven Seas was like, we want to compile it in a way that creates that more fluent narrative. Or maybe they just said, F it, this is the way we want it. And it's like, whatever. But it feels really elaborate to not have a structure for that reason. So I'm going to keep this up on Whiteboard Coon. And each week we're going to kind of talk about what this chapter is about and then how it compares, you know, relative to where we see it on there. So that's my, those are my thoughts on there. But yeah, I'm going to have to rewrite this little kid part there. There we go. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the order. I'm very curious as to why, but I guess we'll find that out. So let's talk about these chapters. There was a lot of callbacks to other MXTX stories, which I was like, ooh, okay, all right. There's some callbacks, some fun things happening. And there were 2 images that were very, very nice. I'll go ahead and show them to you while I'm thinking about it. It's a little bit hard because I don't want to be spoiled and scroll to different images, so I kept my bookmark in. The one of Lo Binghe as the baby is really adorable. I could see why Shen QingQiu would want to squish his little cheeks. They're very cute. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. And then the other one, really, I've been wanting some decent Shen QingQiu, Lo Binghe, like romantic images. And this one, Shen QingQiu being the seducer. Mm-hmm. I'm here for it. We'll talk about that scene and chapter 87 here. So, but yeah, I'm like, well, it's about damn time. I'm sure all of you that have been reading listening to me complain the last few weeks are like, just wait, girl, you're gonna get some good ones coming up here. Don't you worry. And I'm like, well, it's nice to finally be here. So yeah, let's talk about these chapters. So chapter 87 is the Deep Dream. I really like this chapter a lot. My one thing I really like about it is that Shen QingQiu, to Shen QingQiu's credit and to Lo Binghe's credit, a roundabout way, I keep wanting Shen QingQiu and Lo Binghe to communicate with one another, but there's a lot that Shen QingQiu knows about Proud Immortal Demon Way and the structure of it that Lo Binghe doesn't. And so the communication between them does have limits to how far it can go. And so while I wish that Lo Binghe and him were communicating more overall, I think that they communicate a lot more in this chapter set. And I think that it's important that Shen QingQiu kind of sees Lo Binghe when he's not around Shen QingQiu, because when Lo Binghe is around Shen QingQiu, he is an obsessive puppy, and it can be a lot. It can be stage 5 clinger sometimes, and I'm like, back off, dude. But he does love Shen QingQiu a lot, and he kind of like lets it override his brain. So I'm glad that Shen QingQiu kind of gets to get more appreciation for him by seeing him when he's not around Shen QingQiu and like going crazy. I do like that. I think that that's important, that he has the dream sequence where he can go back to Huan Palace, and we kind of fill in the gaps and see what happened with Mu Qingfang and what happened with the whole, like, him trying to preserve the corpse by giving his energy every day to keep the corpse alive. Because we know that Lo Binghe loves Shen QingQiu. Like, it is, we've known it since volume 1, since episode 1 of the Donghua. It has been known. And I want to give Lo Binghe credit that he does an awful lot for Shen QingQiu. He does an awful lot. And I think by the end of chapter 87, Shen QingQiu like tries to reciprocate. But Shen QingQiu is also kind of tsundere himself. So he's like, how do I reciprocate to him and tell him how appreciative I am? But at the same time, he's like, I'm kind of like a grumpy cat. So I'm going to show affection and just let you have your way with me, and we'll just do it that way. And I'm open to it, and it's fine. And that's consensual. That's great. And that's his way of saying, I love you back, and you did all this for me. I want to return the favor. Like, I appreciated that. I thought that was great by the end of this chapter. I was like, yes, awesome, wonderful. So basically, something else that was really interesting too is I thought that Lo Binghe was going to lose his temper with Mu Qingfang. I thought he was going to lose his temper. And the story has conditioned you to think it's going to happen. The story has conditioned you because volume 3, the last chapter where Lo Binghe was like, everything's going well. And he's like, actually, it's not. And he throws this big tantrum and you're like, I was expecting him to be really violent, and he wasn't. He actually surprisingly kept himself in check, which was good. I'm like, cool, you can do that. Awesome. Great. So I did, like, Lo Binghe gained a lot of points for me this chapter set because he did act like a decent person. And I was like, good, awesome. So then, of course, he goes, one thing I am glad too is that when he gets to Shin QingQiu and the corpse, and they do the whole like disrobing and holding him against him so he can like share his spiritual energy, I'm really glad that that wasn't sexual. Not that I'm gonna judge anybody for necromancy. Not that I'm gonna judge y'all if that's your thing. Different strokes for different folks. But it's not my thing. And I was like, ooh, I don't know how I feel about that. So I'm glad that it didn't get sexual. I'm glad that what it was instead was it was this really touching scene where Shen QingQiu makes the logical connection that he's like, oh, he's like, this way in which Lo Binghe is holding me is how I was holding him back, way back when at the bamboo house, back before all this happened when he was like 15 or 16. He's like, that's calling back to that. And one, for Shen QingQiu, it's further evidence that Lo Binghe has liked him for a very long time, and now he can connect two and two together, and it's like, oh, so there's that, which we'll talk about later in this chapter, but also it's the fact that now if you go back in retrospect to volume 2, whenever Liu Qingge breaks in and Lo Binghe has the corpse, now that scene has an extra layer of context. And it's like, oh, okay, now we see what's going on. And I don't want to label Lo Binghe as a did nothing wrong protagonist, because I think that's getting a little too much like airplane shooting towards the sky. I don't want to say Lo Binghe's never done anything wrong in his life. No, he's messed up quite a bit. And let's not pretend like he hasn't made some boo-boos. But I do think that one thing this story does is that it makes you really think that Lo Binghe is more devious than he actually is. And then when you go back and actually see the scene, yeah, there are times where he makes mistakes. Into volume 3 is a big mistake that he makes. And you're like, the fudge. But throughout the story leading up to that point, he had made mistakes before, but they came to light. And then there were other moments where you thought he was in the wrong, and then it came to light that he wasn't. And this was also one of those moments. So I appreciate it. I like that he's very gentle with Shen QingQiu's corpse, and he has this faith that Shen QingQiu is going to come back to him, which is super sweet and very, very endearing. And the sad part is that while all this was going on, and Lo Binghe was like tenderly holding his Shizun and hoping that he would come back and pouring his spiritual energy into him, while all this was going on, I do want to say that it does not escape me that meanwhile, Shen QingQiu was in a mushroom body, worried that Lo Binghe was going to try to kill him. So it's so weird how far apart they were. And now it's like this final volume, they're sort of like coming back together, which is good, right? Which is good. So then we have the flashback scene in the bamboo house, right? Where there's a couple questions that I do have that MXTX leaves a little vague for us, the reader. And I don't know if we're supposed to interpret them in our own way or if MXTX is hinting at different things. Here's the thing. There's nothing outright said specifically, so you can determine a couple things yourself. And I guess it's left open to interpretation how you want to take it. But one is that Lo Binghe says that some of the bruises, like Shen QingQiu loves Lo Binghe as well. These two bakas love each other unconditionally. They're just not the greatest at communicating that. And it's frustrating. But with that being said, I do think that Shen QingQiu, he immediately is like kind of caring about Lo Binghe, being like, why are you going out in the wind and the cold to put this medicine on? Why are you covered in bruises? And Lo Binghe is like, oh, I didn't know I woke you up. And Shen QingQiu was like, you did, so what's going on? So at first he tried to say that Bison Peak is the result of these injuries. Now, Bison Peak does not necessarily mean Liu Qingge. It just means his little flunky minions, although they're not his disciples. Remember, he doesn't take on disciples till much later, but they are Bison Peak disciples, and they're a bunch of like, they strike me as like martial arts jocks is how they strike me, right? They strike me as like the enemy team in a sports anime. is how they would come across. Although in Donghua, I don't know if what that would be considered. I guess a sports Donghua. But Liu Qingge is not responsible for these injuries. It's explicitly said because Shen Qingqiu's like, well, I'm going to go to Liu Qingge and give him peace of my mind and tell him that he needs to show some discipline to his kids over there. And then Lo Binghe's like, oh, no, it's not just them. It's not just them. Then he says that he's been practicing this cultivation and he's been hurting himself. Now, Lo Binghe has a long history in this story of self-harm, which is not cool and is not good. And Shen Qingqiu is like not, he doesn't want him to go through that. And I'm glad Shen Qingqiu is like, this is not healthy. You should not be doing this. Right. And I feel like Lo Binghe, he does what a lot of, I'll use the shonen trope example in a lot of anime. A lot of main characters in series, they're like, oh, I'll solve the problem myself. And if I can't solve the problem myself and I get hurt along the way, well, it's fine. I'll just make sure to get it done. And I've watched a lot of series where that can only work to an extent and to a point, and then it starts to become really destructive. So Lo Binghe is like an extreme case of that, where it's like, oh, you don't need to be hurting yourself. You're not helping, and you're also making Shen Qingqiu worry, so stop that. So instead, Shen Qingqiu's like, look, you need to go inside, get out of this cold. Let's go in there, and I'll put the medicine on for you. Now, at this point in the story, where we're at in chapter 87, right? Where we are in chapter 87, we are back where Lo Binghe is like 15 to 16, and Shen Qingqiu as Shen Yan is probably like mid-20s, right? Or early 20s. Still, there's enough of an age gap there. And so they're there together, and by this point, what we don't exactly know is has some of these events already occurred? I assume that the incident with the demon woman that occurred in the house where, Lo Binghe was like, oh my God, I'm in love with Shizun. I'm assuming that's already happened at this point. And this is just kind of like, this is after the Skinner demon, I'm assuming is what this is. Because Shen Qingqiu, it's not too far after it because Ming Fan still thinks that like we're going back to the old days where we're beating up Lo Binghe, but it's shortly after that. So it's after that, and Lo Binghe has established that he likes his Shizun. Well, this wasn't in the Donghua, would have explained a lot of things. And what I like about these extras so far is, as we're getting into it, we're starting to see more and more instances where Lo Binghe, he's always loved Shen Qingqiu, but we're starting to see more and more of the layers of it and how much it's built up over time. So I would imagine if you go back and read volumes 1 through 3 after reading this volume, suddenly it's going to make a lot more sense why some of the things that Lo Binghe did have happened. And by this time, as I'm recording it, I am sure that you all have told me this and are going to tell me in the comments down below. I'm sure y'all are going to make that very, very aware. And so I'm like, oh, that's kind of why it's hard when you're doing reactions. Because if you're a content creator doing reactions week to week, I had this exact same thing happen in Berserk. And it would be where you would read something and I'm reading it week to week. So of course you react in the moment of being like, well, here's what's happened for these set of chapters, but I'm not binge reading. So I can't immediately see if I'm right or wrong about something. And then as you keep reading, then you're like, oh, well, this gets explained and that gets explained. And okay, now I get this and so on and so forth. So you're kind of left in that position and it's like, okay, but yeah, now it's like, you're starting to see like more and more layers with Lo Binghe peel back. And you kind of get to see more and more about how his love for his Shizun has grown. And it's like, okay, go to from there. Now, there are some things we need to talk about with this story and sidestep. And again, MXTX likes, as you've seen in this story, as well as Heaven Official's Blessing and Modao Zushi, MXTX likes to play with what we, the audience, accept in relationships and what we, the audience, kind of like want out of said relationships and how we view romance and things like that. Like MXTX is not afraid to get kinky and they're not afraid to touch some taboo topics and go on different things. But primarily MXTX handles it in a very graceful, diligent, appropriate manner, right? And I think that even when they get into some things that are more taboo, she handles it in a way that's not filthy, right? Because some people are, it's filthy, and I can't do that. So I will say, with Modao Zushi, for example, not to get into any spoilers, but there's a lot of consent, there's a lot of exploration, but there's a lot of both parties being comfortable with it, and they're both consensual adults. That's important. That's very important. So now, QingQiu, I think the one thing that saves this scene is that QingQiu, at this point, does not... It's hard. It's hard because we, the audience, where I find trouble is because some people are like, oh, well, Shen Yan was in love and had the hots for Lo Binghe even before he got into the novel, and was like, had a shrine to him and everything and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, he liked the adult Lo Binghe. But then that makes scenes like this one where he's hugging an adolescent kid on a bed a little bit awkward, because it's like, but you know who he becomes as an adult, and you have the hots for him as an adult, but he's not an adult, he's a kid. And the thing that saves it is that, one, QingQiu is not expecting anything sexual from this encounter. He knows, or he believes, that Lo Binghe is heterosexual. So he believes that what they're doing right now, he's just helping him apply this medicine and helping to fix his meridians. QingQiu feels that, like, him embracing him and laying down on the bed with him, there's nothing sexual about it. He's just like, I'm trying to help and trying to make this go faster. He's like, I don't want to massage medicine on your body. So let's just do this and get it over with. So QingQiu is trying to be efficient. He's trying to, like, get this done. He doesn't think Lo Binghe has a crush on him. He isn't meaning anything sexual by it, so it's fine. I was a little worried at first because I was like, oh, Lo Binghe's 15, you're an adult, this is kind of creepy, but it's really not. It's really nothing bad is meant by it, and I think MXTX is responsible enough to understand what she's doing that I could see some people taking this a very wrong way, right? And I understand where they're coming from, because as a teacher and an adult, I'm like, if you look at this from a surface level, from a distance, you go, oh, this is not correct and appropriate. And Lo Binghe even calls out saying, like, this isn't appropriate. Now, Lo Binghe, that's the other thing too. I think because it's a two-way street, this scene works. Because if QingQiu had at any time had sexual thoughts or tried to make this sexual with little 15-year-old Lo Binghe, his little white lamb lotus, I would have had a lot of problems with it, but that never happens. So that's okay. The other thing is, if Lo Binghe had been like, yeah, let's get it on, and I'm going to enjoy this, and like all that, then it would have been wrong and filthy and would have been like Proud Immortal Demon Way. Would have been like something Airplane Shooting Towards the Sky would have written. But as it is, and as MXTX writes it, she does this very cleverly, where she has QingQiu just rolling through the motions, being like, let's just, like, quit being unreasonable. Let's just do this. And QingQiu isn't trying to be sexual at all, while Lo Binghe realizes how his heavenly pillar is reacting. He's getting some boner issues going on, and he's like, I can't stay here. He's like, I can't do this. I can't be part of this. So he willingly gets out of the situation. Now, should QingQiu have put two and two together? Our oblivious peacock did not. And we can slap his, face palm him all day, but it just didn't happen. But I think that I do like how he calls him a little hedgehog. That's a perfect description for Lo Binghe, a little squirming hedgehog. And then of course QingQiu's like, I'm treating you, be good. And it's like, doesn't realize what he's doing. But that's why I think that it works. And then I love an interesting play on words is saying that he smacks his butt. And he did that just to be like, now stop that. And Lo Binghe was quite okay with that. Now, could they translate that into their bedtime activities in the future? And Lo Binghe is perfectly fine being reprimanded by his Shazoon. You could have that role play if you wanted to. That'd be fine. But here, I do like the irony of the moment that QingQiu spanks him, Lo Binghe turns into a human stick, which is what he makes QingQiu in the future. And so it's like, ha ha ha. So that's funny. I like that comparison. It's not lost on me. and then he tries to get away from him, right? Now, the part here where, of course, I will play devil's advocate for people that find this kind of gross. The fact is that it is like a teacher-student relationship at this point, and it's going to eventually develop into not a teacher-student, and that goes back to Shen Yan from before, so it makes it a little more complicated. If you, by chance, thought this was a little bit weird, I could understand that. I can look past it and go, no, I get what MXTX is doing, and because she makes it to where both parties are viewing this as a very innocent, or they're trying to get out of it and not take advantage of one another, I think it's okay. The fact that neither of them are taking advantage of the other, I think works. Now, Lo Binghe does say, you know, like, would you do this to Ning Ying Ying? And Shen Qingqiu's like, no. Shen Qingqiu's like, she's a girl and she's a young woman. I wouldn't do that. Which I'm like, he's a young man. Why does it make it? That is the one part I wanted to smack Shen Qingqiu when he was just like, no. But then he has to say, you know, well, I would never dare to use this method of treatment on her. She's a young lady. And I'm like, young lady, and it being an inappropriate gesture, it's still just as inappropriate as Lo Binghe being a young man and doing it. So that reasoning, I'm like, Shen Qingqiu, that reasoning doesn't track, sir. I was like, you can't say it's okay to do it to this young man, but not this young woman. They're both the same age. If it's not good for one, it's not good for either. So that track of logic, I was like, oh, Shen Qingqiu, I don't follow that. But he also is like, he's like, well, I wouldn't do this with anybody else either. And then Lo Binghe, of course, his brain is short-circuiting and overriding with all this information. And he's like, what the fudge? So there you go, right? But anyway, so Lo Binghe starts to, and my dog is like at my feet wanting me to pet her. Lo Binghe gets flustered and he has to leave. And of course he goes to find like a pond to cool off in and get his boner out of the way. I do wish that this was animated because I'm going to be honest, the chase scene of running through the Qijing Peak trying to find him and Ming Fan thinking they're going to like literally go scramble and have a mob, you know, that part was funny. But the moment where Lo Binghe is like, I don't want to come out, and Shen Qingqiu like wades into the pond and like looks down at him and he's like, do you need this master to help you out? Like that moment where he's very intimidating, I would have loved to have seen that animated. That would have been really, really good. And Lo Binghe is like, nope, I'm good. We're going to go here. It's fine. And so then, of course, Shen Qingqiu, he like threatens his students being like, well, if you don't get out of here right now, I'm going to get you up in 2 hours to copy scrolls 100 times. And then they just leave automatically. So he's like, I'll go back to the woodshed. And then he's like, what has gotten into tonight? And when Shen Qingqiu says, an outsider who didn't know what was going on would imagine that this master had done something unforgivable to you. Well, the unforgivable thing that Shen Qingqiu did was he roused up Lo Binghe's attraction to him and made him have a sexual awakening. He literally, if the teacup wasn't Lo Binghe's sexual awakening, this scene most certainly was. What I really liked about the chapter 2, though, was, so we had the Dream Realm scene where he like saw Lo Binghe doing the same method of giving the spiritual energy to him that he had gave to Lo Binghe back at the bamboo house. But what I like is that there's this little passage where it's kind of like in the future tense, and Shen Qingqiu is like, later, Shen Qingqiu recalled the incident and tried to tease Lo Binghe about it, and Lo Binghe wouldn't blush. He tried to act mature, and he's like, well, I was at the age when I was susceptible to passions. The person I admired most held me in his arms and hugged and rubbed himself against me. Shizun, how could you ask me to keep myself under control? Having realized my feelings, I was unable to control my body's reaction, but I was afraid that you would notice. What could I have done other than make a fool of myself? I like this communication. I'm like, yes. So Lo Binghe and him have this communication and it's amazing. And he's like, what did you expect me to do? He's like, this is what happened. Like, how else was I supposed to react? And I like that Shen Qingqiu like smiles at this moment of like Lo Binghe kind of admitting some vulnerability. And he's like, oh. Like, I love that. And then he smiled at the moment recalling all of that. But then when he sees Lo Binghe and seeing him holding Shen Qingqiu's corpse in his arms, he's like, well, but this moment wasn't so funny. This moment he was genuinely in pain and suffering and didn't know if I was going to come back or not. So yeah, I know I'm harsh to Lo Binghe the last couple weeks, And I don't want to downplay his trauma or downplay his experiences because I think that they're horrible. I just think sometimes trauma doesn't give you the excuse to, not treat someone well in return. And Lo Binghe, for the most part, treats Shen Qingqiu very wonderfully, like goes above and beyond. But there are moments where he's childish and selfish that I'm like, and then he tries to make the excuse, well, I'm traumatized. And I'm like, well, your trauma is an excuse to be mean to somebody. That's bully behavior, and you don't do that. And here, that's not the case. Here, Shen Qingqiu kind of has more of a chance to see where a lot of this emotion is coming from and what it's connecting to. And so he gets to see Lo Binghe, like, what he does during the day and again, he gets to see just how much Lo Binghe cares about him. Like, he makes the same food that he made the first time he was at the bamboo house, and he keeps bringing it back to Shen Qingqiu and the corpse, thinking that whenever Shen Qingqiu wakes up, here will be all the food, right? And it'll all be there for him, and it'll be great. And so it's really good to see that Shen Qingqiu is figuring out how Lo Binghe has been while he's been away. And the part that got me in chapter 87 was not only when he has to deal with all the demons and stuff, and he comes back to the pavilion, and first he gets rid of all the blood on him. He burns it all away because he doesn't want any blood to touch the corpse, because he doesn't want a demon to be able to control that body, rightfully so. But then he looks down and he's like, oh, I'm not gonna have time to bring him food today. But then he goes and makes it anyway and brings it back. And it's like, oh, I'm like, where is this? Where has this been? Where has this been? And then the fact that, what's so crazy about it is that he brings back the kanji, and then he tells like Shen Qingqiu about Liu Qingge rescuing Mu Qingfang. And he's like, it's fine. He's been rescued. He tells me there's nothing to do. And then he says, I can't hold on for much longer. If you don't wake up soon, I won't be able to hold on much longer. And the crazy thing is, which is suggesting that he's going to like Romeo and Juliet himself if he can't get Shen Qingqiu to wake up. And Shen Qingqiu's like, the crazy thing is he kept with him for 2,000 nights more. So I want to do the quick math because I'm not a mathematician. I don't know such math. So like 2,000 nights divided by 365 is about 5 years, which 4 or 5 is about the whole length of the dew mushroom. Yeah. And that explains why whenever Shen Qingqiu comes back and whenever the Holy Mausoleum arc happens and the body moves and all that, it would explain why Lo Binghe was so freaked out and losing his mind, because he's like, I went to all this trouble. I suffered all this time. I looked after his corpse every day. I made him food. I told him stories. I waited on him. And now the corpse is just gone? I'm like, it makes more sense now. It makes a lot more sense, honestly. I'm like, okay, now we know. Now we have more ideas about Lo Binghe's state of mind throughout all of this. So then Shen Qingqiu is trying to like, I know the feeling like when you're trying to wake up and you're kind of like half groggy, half there. And it's like your body is just all like numb and tingly and you can't move. It's like sleep paralysis. But Lo Binghe, of course, he wakes up and then sees Lo Binghe in front of him being his little puppy dog. And he's like, fine. And what I love is every time, I always get excited when we go into the dream realm, because usually what happens in the dream realm is that Shen Qingqiu finds out something about Lo Binghe that makes us, the reader, like him more. Like having him in like the lap here and him comforting him. Like it makes more sense now. It's like, okay. It helps to give us, the audience, more perspective. And here, I would have done what Shen Qingqiu had done. I've been like, you know what? You did all those awesome things for me, and you're still here. He's like, tonight, I feel like I like you a great deal. And of course, Lo Binghe is like, if you're giving me permission, I might get rough. And Shen Qingqiu's like, you speak as if it doesn't hurt when you are gentle. He's like, I'll endure it gladly. I like that Shen Qingqiu is, they're not like Wang Shen, they're not like Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji, who are like kinky sons of bitches. Like, they're not like that. And they're not like Xilian and Hua Chong, who are like tenderly caressing each other for 800 years. But they are where QingQiu, they are getting to that point where they're like, okay, you can't help but be rough, sir. I get it. We'll just make the most of it. It'll be fine. I know what you mean. He's like, I can endure it because I know where your underlying love is coming from and what you mean by it. I'm like, okay. All right. So maybe there's stuff happening in between these chapters that are going to explain why we had this lovely shift here. I'm not opposed to it. I'm happy for it. I'm just like, would have been great to have it back up a few chapters and start with, but I guess we have to roll into it. So then we have chapter 88, which is the return to childhood, which seems to take place immediately after the incidents of chapter 87. Now, if you've not seen Heaven Official's Blessing, I'm going to give some spoilers for the next 30 seconds or more, and I'll wave my hand like this when I'm done with Heaven Official's Blessing spoilers. So if you've not read Heaven Official's Blessing, wait till I give this signal again, and then I'll be done with those spoilers. But the moment that we found out that Binghe became a kid, I was like, okay. MXTX took this idea and had the chapters in Heaven Official's Blessing. I forget which volume it is now, maybe 3 or 4, where Huachong becomes the kid after expending all his energy and has to like work his way back up to being adult Huachong. And I was like, oh, so we just took this idea and did it again in that one. That's cool. My one thing is, I will say this chapter set almost took a turn, and I was like, at the very end, I was like, don't do it. Don't do it, MXTX. I know you like skirting across the line, but don't you do it. And at the very end, she didn't. And I feel like during Heaven Official's Blessing, Huachong and Shilian were very innocent. It was more trolling. They were more smirking. Like the whole thing with Huachong being this little kid when he's like this impossibly strong demon lord that you should be terrified of is part of the joke. And everybody kind of pokes and prods at him. He's like, when I'm back to my power, I'll make you rue the day. And Shilian's just like, wasn't this funny and cute? Ha ha ha. And it's more like tongue in cheek, like they're just smirking about it and laughing about it. Here, it gets a little bit at the very end, whenever in the Heaven Official's Blessing spoilers, whenever like QingQiu wanted to do something with him, but he's an 8-year-old child, and Binghe is like, we can't because I'm an 8-year-old child, even though I have the mind of a 20-something-year-old adult, and he just yells in frustration. At that point, I was like, oh, thank goodness. I was like, yes, let's not try to have that moment and justify it. Let's just let it be like it is. Glad we did that. So good on you, MXTX. You had me worried for a hot second. I was like, but you pulled through. So yeah, so he becomes a kid because of a chi deviation. Apparently it can do that to you. Could you imagine little baby Liu Qingge, just like little tiny chibi Liu Qingge? Like I need it, but I also can't imagine it. But basically, so QingQiu thinks this is the best. He's like, look at you. And so they decide that he needs to leave the demon realm because it's not safe for them there. Imagine this, the two gays have made enemies. And so he's like, let's see, where do we need to go? And immediately, QingQiu's like, well, where do we want to go to? He's like, we could go to Qijing Peak. And of course, Binghe doesn't want to do that. And I'm glad that what we end up getting is the start of a conversation where Binghe asks QingQiu about it. And I wanted that conversation to continue, but it didn't. And I was like, ugh. So I'm hoping that they continue that conversation in the next set of chapters. I hope so, but we'll see. So I like that QingQiu gives him a hard time, and he's like, you know, you're in this little kid's body. We're going to have to go somewhere. And so Binghe's like just super mad. He's like, you were impetuous tormenting this master, and now you're suffering the consequences. And Binghe's like, well, you're the one that seduced me first. And QingQiu's like, you got a point, touche. I like that internally he's like, oh, like, how dare you convince me of something that's the truth? I was like, I really liked their relationship in both these chapters. It felt like pre-chapter 78 again. It felt like what we were building up to in chapters 72 through 74 and 75 and 77. It felt like that again. And I was like, this is what I've been waiting on. I had to wait a month to get this. MXTX, how dare you? But here we are again. So I was like, good, great. So they go to the human realm, and they try to hang out there, but I feel like it's much more socially acceptable in the cultivation world when you are single and beyond the age of 20, because their cultivation, you know, they're kind of like monks in a sense. They're cultivating. They ain't got time for family. They're peak lords. They ain't got time for family. They're dedicated to their jobs. So it's more acceptable. Whereas in the human realm, they're like, you're 25 and you don't have a kid? What's going on? And you got a single kid here. Why don't you go try to get married? I'm glad that this whole thing with the ladies ended up a lot better than it could have, because Lo Binghe being like, I'm going to rip them apart, and Shen Qingqiu's like, you know what? We should probably go. I think we're good to leave. But I'm glad that there wasn't like, Lo Binghe didn't have this intense jealousy with Shen Qingqiu. He wasn't just like, well, do you like these women or not? Kind of like how he'd been in volume 1. Instead, their relationship is pretty well established at this point, enough for Shen Qingqiu to be like, oh, I'm good. I'm not going to go with those ladies. You should know that. Come on now. And so I think it worked out a lot better. And so, yeah, all these ladies tried to get Shen Qingqiu match made, and Lo Binghe was like, absolutely not. And they tried to leave him behind. They tried to have Shen Qingqiu leave behind his child. And Lo Binghe is like, oh, to hell with that. And Shen Qingqiu's like, let's just go. We're going to try to go back to Sangjiang Mountain and have everything go well. The fact that everybody at Sangjiang Mountain thought that Shen Qingqiu had a child with Lo Binghe, I was wondering if MXTX was going to flit some casual Omegaverse into this. She did not disappoint. I just need MXTX to write Omegaverse. I don't mind Omegaverse. I think that some of them are fine. I think the concept of it is interesting, and you can do a lot thematically with an Omegaverse, as far as like status and gender and sexuality and childbearing and stuff like that goes. But I feel like it's hilarious to me how the story tries to justify that it could happen, because in other stories, and I'm not going to say how or why, it is explained how MXTX could invoke Omegaverse things into those stories. It's explained, and it has some logic, and you're like, okay. But here I was like, how are you going to logically explain Shen Qingqiu having a child with Lo Binghe? And the answer is because Lo Binghe is a demon. I guess that makes it possible. And everybody thinks that Lo Binghe is their child, and Ning Ying wants to give him a name. She's like, I had like 50 names picked out, as if if they had a child, he would, and it looked like a 7-year-old, they wouldn't have already given it a name. Girl. But then Ming Fan is like, I like Ming Fan immediately goes and tattles to Liu Qingge, and Liu Qingge is like, what? Also, Liu Qingge is like, what are you hiding for? And Shen Qingqiu's like, I'm not hiding. Who's hiding? What? And then Lo Binghe is like, I'm not afraid of him. And then at first, Liu Qingge glares down at Lo Binghe, and he's like, is this their kid? Because they don't know why he would be in such a small form. And that's when Shen Qingqiu is like, airplane shooting towards the sky didn't write a green Xinjiang impreg novel. I guess Xinjiang might be Omegaverse in the Chinese novel universe. But yeah. And they're like, well, who could have known he would have suffered that from a chi deviation? And Shen Qingqiu's like, that stair sweeper, how talented he is to immediately gossip to the entire Qijing Peak and get all... we didn't get to see Yu Qingyang's direct reaction. He kind of is just at the end like figures. But the thing that gets me is that the moment they go to the dining hall to see everybody, Yu Qingyang, they describe his expression as being a bit strange when he saw Shen Qingqiu, but he didn't say anything. I do feel kind of bittersweet there. And I'm hoping we get more chapter 73 when we get to those chapters, because I do feel a little bit sad, because Yu Qingyang and Shen Qingqiu have kind of established that they're, not even exes. Like Shen Qingqiu's like, we're just not going to ever be a thing. Taylor Swift's You and I Are Never Getting Back Together is blaring in the distance. And the sad thing is Yu Qingyang doesn't know that Shen Qingqiu isn't pursuing this relationship. I mean, obvious reasons, Lo Binghe, but because he's not Shinju, he's Shinyan, and Yu Qingyang is like, I don't understand what I did wrong, except other than not come back and get you. And it's like, I can understand now why the Discord and everybody is like all about the alternate universe fanfic and fandom where Shinju and Yu Qingyang get to be together. I understand that pull now, because it's like there's so many what ifs with that timeline and that scenario that aren't possible now, and it just sucks. You almost want this timeline's Yu Qingyang to go back and get with Shinju and to have their own happily ever after. You want that for them, but it's just not possible, and it sucks. And I feel for him. I'm like, damn, that sucks. I feel for them quite a bit. But yeah, so then I wanted Shang Qinghua and Shen Qingqiu to have a conversation. I wanted them to have a conversation together. I wanted that. I'm sad that I was denied that. Where was it? But so my question is, I thought the regret of Chen Shan was, I thought that was Shang Qinghua's masterpiece. I thought that was where he was getting his notoriety and fame. Why is it being restricted? And yeah, what is the Song of Binghe? What is this? I did get a little slight glance at the title for the next chapter set, and it said Chen Shan on it, and that's all I saw, and I was like, are we going to get answers next week? I hope we get answers next week. I need Shang Qinghua, which honestly, next week's chapter set is right after this week's in the 7 Seas version as well as the OG, so that tells me that they both correspond together, so I feel like next week we might get the answers about Shang Qinghua's restrictions and why this is, as well as maybe Lo Binghe gaining back his original age. Maybe, possibly. Because he gains like 2 years worth of age in like a night. So we'll see where that goes. But yeah, anybody after the 1 month deadline will be severely punished, and it'll be increased by 1 level for illustration. So what is this ban on pornography? What is this BL ban? What is happening? I need to know why. And then it says, second, the Bison Peak brawls are prohibited and they need to be more disciplined. So that's an effect. After a small number of complaints, Qijing Peak shall take note of the time when practicing the chin and avoid noon breaks and nighttime. So it's basically quit practicing these instruments at night. Everybody's hating it. Then my favorite out of all of these is Shanshu Peak fortifying their walls further and having their fences electrified. Amazing. I'm like, get them perverts out of there. Great. Then it said that because the numbers of Qijing Peak has dwindled, they're going to have more recruitment efforts, and then the Peak Lords have to pay attention to education, and they can't fight publicly with Huan Palace. I like that all of these little things are like plot hole fixing elements, but I'm curious why the Ballad of Chunshin and this Song of Binghe is being targeted. I'm interested. And then they also have the last one that if demons are encountered, don't immediately attack them. Make sure that they're affiliated with something that might be okay. I'm like, most of these rules are interesting. But yeah, the first one I'm like, and everybody's like, why is this at the top of the... Why is Shang Qinghua so adamant that they get rid of the ballads? Did Mo Beijun tell him to stop it? Did Mo Beijun tell him to stop? I'm curious. I'm also curious why Shang Qinghua had like a busted lip. I did feel a little bit bad for him. I'm like, oh, I've been shipping secretly Mo Beijun and Shang Qinghua for a while. And I'm like, I don't want their relationship to be abusive. So I'm hoping that that's not the case. I'm hoping it's not an abusive relationship. Or if it is, it's like kinky role play that they're okay and consensual about. I did get a little worried in that moment. I was like, is Mo Beijun hurting you? Is that, blink twice, Shang Qinghua, if you need help. So I'm very curious to know what's up with him. But anyway, so I also like that Liu Qingge is the one that notices that Lo Binghe's grown bigger. And then Shen Qingqiu's like, oh, you're right. Uh-huh. And so then, of course, we meet this Wei Qingwei. I like that we have Qi Qingqi and Wei Qingwei. I'm like, I need to do mouth exercises before I read these chapters. Because this is crazy. So yeah. And so then we have all the Peak Lords and stuff that are like trying to make fun of Lo Binghe in this small children's form. And Shen Qingqiu is like, he's like, hey, let's not make fun of him, you know. And they're like, oh, you're being a killjoy. And he's like, save me some face. This is my boyfriend here. We can't help it. And so then the one thing that I'm kind of sad about is that they do ask if Shen Qingqiu wants to go out drinking with them. And Shen Qingqiu is like, no, I'm fine. I'm going to stay back with him. Like, that's cool. And then Shen Qingqiu is like, you know, you don't have to take care of that paperwork. It's fine. I'll do that. And Lo Binghe is like, well, you weren't here and I had nothing else to do with, so I thought I might as well do it. And so they finally have this conversation, and I wish it was longer. I wish they went into more detail about it. But he's like, are you not happy being here? And at first, Lo Binghe is like, I'm fine. And then he immediately is like, no, actually, I hate it. And so Shen Qingqiu is like, well, if you're unhappy, just say so. And from now on, if you have something to say, don't shut it inside your heart and stifle your feelings. If you really don't like this, we'll leave once you get back in your original form. It's just in your current state, we can't travel. So at least you can be protected here. And they actually have a conversation where he's like, I do like it, but the Qijing Peak I like is only Qijing Peak. He's like, I don't like Sangjiang Mountain. Aside from shooting myself, it has no other people. And QingQiu is like, well, the version that you like is just what you imagine from your nostalgia. It's not really everybody else. And so that's when Lo Binghe praised the high heavens, asks and says, is it true that being with me has made you lose opportunities to do things for yourself? And QingQiu laughs it off and is like, well, you weren't supposed to be listening. And he says, the reason I didn't want to come back is because it's not because I don't like this place, but he's like, I don't want people to steal you away from me. He's like, if I was my adult self, I feel like I could defend you and, speak up for myself. He's like, but here, I feel like I can't win against others. And QingQiu like bops him and he's like, well, who's asking you to win? He's like, you don't have to steal me. I'm going to go with you myself. Right? And it says the appearance of one's conversation partner was truly of utmost importance. If this were the adult version of Lo Binghe, QingQiu wouldn't have said something so frank, even if you held his... I like that he's like, if this had been the adult Lo Binghe, he would not have been... He would have been like... He would not have wanted to say this because it would have made him look bad. But here he's like, well, you're a kid, so I got to explain it out. So he feels more comfortable talking to him. I'm like, well, then stay a kid forever if it means you guys will talk it out. And then, of course... That's when Lo Binghe lifts up his gaze and adores him. I really wanted them to carry on this conversation more because, again, one of my biggest complaints has been that Lo Binghe doesn't want to share QingQiu or let QingQiu have friends. And it is something that bothers me a lot because I hate that with real life couples where the partner is like, you can't go out and see other friends because they're jealous that their partner will cheat on them. We know that QingQiu is not going to cheat on Lo Binghe. We know that. So he should be able to go out and have a drink with Qi and Ning Ying Ying and Yu Qingyan and Liu Qingge. It's going to be fine. And I want Lo Binghe to get to that point where he's okay with him going out and hanging out with people. And if he doesn't want to go hang out with them too, he can stay back and do whatever. Or he can go hang out with them. I want that to be something that develops between them. And it felt like this chapter, we got really close to that, but we didn't go all the way. We didn't cross the finish line. We just addressed it, but we didn't fully get to that point. So I'm hoping that's something I would love a chapter in here that Lo Binghe, even if it's begrudgingly, he goes along with QingQiu to hang out with his friends, or even if he just checks in on him and then goes does his own thing, that's fine. So that QingQiu can have something for himself, right? I love that the two of them love each other unconditionally, but it's they have to be able to hang out with other people and it'd be okay, right? And so then, of course, at the very end, QingQiu is he's like, well, it'd be okay if you continued, but I know that that's not appropriate. And then QingQiu is like, we can't do anything. And that's when Lo Binghe is like, brah, how dare. So, interesting. Okay. So, I'm going to be curious what we get the next two chapters because they seem like they are continuations of this one. I hope that QingQiu and Lo Binghe are able to further communicate and develop their relationship. This chapter set felt like a breath of fresh air compared to the last 4 weeks that I've been reading this story. This felt like for the first time we were getting back on the tracks and developing their relationship. And I'm like, oh, thank God. I'm sure you all are happy about that as well. So I'm curious to know if we had to wait till the very end, if we had to wait this many more weeks to get there, I mean, maybe we'd have got stuff in between, but I'm glad we went ahead and touched on this now. So I'm going to be curious to see what we get moving into next week with chapters 89 and 90. So in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more of Scum Villain Self-Saving System. Bye!